All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And I don't have a printed agenda around here somewhere. Give me a second. It's been a very long work day already. There we go. All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. If we could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Michael throw the flag up. And I've learned my lesson, Joe. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Joe, for helping. All right, can we get a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Mr. Kelly, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ms. Hirsch. All right, all those in favor, we're going to do a quick roll call and then I'll go through the standard stuff. Bernstein is a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
yes, please.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if Peter joined us. Peter, share? All right, well, that passes 7-0. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining. It's just a really rough week, and I think we all understand that. So thank you for joining our virtual meeting. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order 7B. Per that order, the meeting is being recorded. It'll be available linked off of our Board of Education website, as well as I believe on our YouTube channel. The agenda for tonight's meeting is at our board docs site. You can get there by going to greenwichschools.org, clicking on the Board of Education, scrolling down and clicking on the meetings box. Once in board docs, you'll see tonight's meeting. You can click there to access the agenda. It's a special meeting, a special business meeting of the Board of Education. We are taking public comments. We've got, I believe, 9 speakers signed up for that tonight. In addition, members of the community can certainly send an email to all Board of Ed members by sending an email to a single address, that is Board of Ed members at greenwich.k12.ct.us. The meeting tonight is going to consist of a discussion between and among the board, the superintendent, and her team. I'd ask everybody to stay muted when they're not speaking, and unless I say your name, please state your name each time you're talking. I'll be using the raise the hand functions so we can call on people in turn. I'd ask that board members try to keep their comments concise. As usual, we have a very full agenda with much going on. And for all voting, we'll be doing that via roll call. So, appreciate all of that. All right, can we get a motion on the consent agenda?
Make the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Hirsch. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Downey. All right, all those in favor of accepting the consent agenda, Bernstein is a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes,
Kowalski?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Olson?
Yes.
And I don't see Peter, but I'll ask again. Mr. Scher? All right, that passes 7-0. Thank you very much. All right, so next up is our public hearing. First, we will start with our GHS student government. Mark and Meredith, are you with us?
Hello? All right, okay. Hello to all the members of the board and the people observing the meeting tonight. My name is Meredith Blanchard and I'm the GHS Senior Class President. I wanted to thank you all again for graciously devoting time to student voices at each meeting. This week marks the return from February break and we have some updates on how things are doing at the high school. First, Tuesday was the first time in several weeks that the Greenwich cohort got to go in person to school. This was due to several factors out of the control of the school, like snow days and holidays, but it did reveal a shortcoming of the hybrid model. However, I do know that the GHS administration is monitoring the number of days that each cohort misses in case there's a need to adjust the calendar in the future. In student government news, we recently had a successful gratitudegram program where students could send a message of appreciation to friends and faculty in the spirit of Valentine's Day. It was a tremendous success with nearly 300 messages sent. Each and every one was kind-spirited and definitely brought smiles and joy over the break. Recently, our VP of Communications, Lily, sent out another edition of the student government newsletter to keep students updated and included a Google form for student feedback. That way, we can get feedback from any student in the whole school rather than just from representatives. Now, more people can have their voices heard in our school community. Lastly, special events like prom and graduation are still pending approval from the health department before we can get the green light. It's difficult when all we want to do is come up with a plan of action, while we also do not know what the status of the pandemic will be in May and June. Nevertheless, we still hope to do at least something to facilitate school community bonding. We have also come up with a graduation speaker to whom we will be reaching out to see if she would be willing to speak. So hopefully we will have more information in a few weeks. Thank you all again for supporting our school community. I will now turn the mic over to our student body president, Mark Chen.
Good evening, Chairman Bernstein, Dr. Jones, members of the board, cabinet, and meeting attendees. My name is Mark Chen, student body president at Greenwich High School. Although we are just coming back from our week-long February break, which I must say was a much needed one, we got straight to business with a student government mass meeting yesterday. Among other concerns and suggestions, the desire for asynchronous Wednesdays was undoubtedly a shared one among our representatives. Overwhelmingly, students are waiting in anticipation for more asynchronous Wednesdays after our very first one back in early December. Digital learning is very fatiguing, both mentally and visually, when running Google Meet classes back to back to back. Any break is a welcome one, and I'm sure both students and faculty alike would appreciate a less structured time to work according to their own pace and needs. I also wanted to take this opportunity to express my support for the Cardinal Stadium project. It was certainly reassuring to hear that the BET Budget Committee moved forward yesterday with approving the release of the $1.7 million. After authorization from the full BET, I hope we are still on track to have new bleachers by the time we graduate. I know this process has been long. I remember the bleachers were condemned back when I was a sophomore by then Superintendent Mayo, and it certainly has not been easy, but I think we are all glad that we are continuing to move forward in a timely manner. As challenging as this year has been, we are continuing to plan events that will spread joy and bring our school closer together. Meredith mentioned the recent digital gratitude gram exchange we did for Valentine's Day in lieu of the traditional candygrams, and it truly was a resounding success, with kind messages sent and received by both students and faculty. We are also moving along with our mask fundraiser/competition, where students from each grade submitted and voted on designs for masks to be ultimately available for purchase. Finally, we are excited to be planning a scavenger hunt of sorts for students, which should bring some fun and inspire a little friendly competition. And on top of all of this, we are also looking into making fun virtual challenges for students that could also serve as fundraisers. Needless to say, there's a lot planned, and we are definitely excited for the future. Thank you for your time tonight. It is always a pleasure.
All right, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate hearing from the students. I should note that by board policy, each speaker has 3 minutes. Next up is the GEA, Carol Sutton.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Jones, cabinet, and members of the Greenwich Public School community on Zoom. My name is Carol Sutton, and I'm honored to represent 900 members of the Greenwich Education Association. Though it's not on the agenda, the flood at North Mianus is surely at the top of the board's and cabinet's to-do list. Coming on the anniversary of the pandemic, the timing of this event is indeed unfortunate, but we're not strangers to school floods, and thus we have examples to follow. For instance, in 2018, the collaborative approach taken by Mr. Mayo enabled COSCOB to get back on its feet as soon as possible and get back to their repaired building smoothly. We hope that Dr. Jones takes a similar approach, because when everyone hears the same information, it cuts off the rumor mill and eases the confusion and uncertainty in the school community. Regarding the path forward, everyone wants the stint in remote learning to be short, because our youngest learners learn best with their teachers and peers in person. However, the strategies used for COSCOB, busing classes to other schools and combining classes to make it work, need to be approached with the caution, need to be approached with caution and deliberation during a pandemic. We trust that the administration will look at all options in order to pursue a solution that does not jeopardize the COVID mitigation practices that have kept the schools open since September. Remote learning, while not ideal, provides continuity while plans are vetted and finalized. A few bullet points. Regarding last Friday's meeting with the BET Budget Committee, thank you to Mr. Bernstein and Dr. Jones for pointing out the tremendous work that teachers are doing this year and acknowledging that it is causing high levels of stress and exhaustion and is not easy. We are seeking relief in the form of additional early release days and more planning time, and we hope the school community will support their teachers' well-being should our requests come to fruition. It is also clear that every one of us is going to have to keep the pressure on for the capital budget that is needed to maintain our buildings, and maybe someday getting them into the 21st century. Greenwich cannot have a first-rate school system if it does not spend more on its buildings very soon. Thank you to the IT department for surveying the students on the pros and cons of their district Chromebooks. If you were to survey the teachers, you'll find similar results, and GEA appreciates any and all efforts that will be made to upgrade the devices. We also appreciate the work of everyone involved in the GPS pre-K and community connections programs. Unless you look for it, it's possible to miss the amazing work that's done with our youngest and oldest students. Pre-K and community connections are solid bookends for our K-12 program. Finally, teachers are looking forward to getting the go-ahead for vaccinations very soon and appreciate the efforts that Mary Keller and her team have taken to load our information into the system so that we're ready for that green light. Thank you, and we hope to see some of you at Greenwich Alliance Trivia Night. Have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. All right, next up, PTA Council, Mr. Pelbrunis.
Good evening. I am Brian Pelgunis, President of PTA Council, representing the 15 school PTAs and the families of all of their members. PTA Council stands ready to assist in any way appropriate with the recovery efforts at North Mianus School. Our remote school committee has already reached out to the North Mianus PTA to offer help. We encourage all parents and all listeners to join the League of Women Voters and PTA Council for a school budget forum at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, February 24th. Go to the League of Women Voters website to register and to submit questions by February 20th for our town educational and financial leaders. You can also see the Greenwich PTA Council Facebook page for details. Following on from previous comments, we continue to support immediate steps to alleviate Chromebook issues. Tonight's DLE report asks the appropriate questions regarding funding, impact of changes, and timeline. Given the current issues are affecting learning now, we hope the BOE will provide clear and immediate guidance. In December, we asked that the district provide clarity on middle school science for the next school year, specifically relating to placement processes and the student split between on-level and advanced level classes. For elementary Alps science, please consider the learning benefits from the more cohesive model proposed in the October Alp review, described tonight for both STEM and humanities. These subjects have become more interdisciplinary in the past few years, and the Alp classrooms need to mirror that model in order to best meet the needs of all students. Reflecting further on the Alp report, we reiterate PTA Council's desire to participate in the needed follow-on work as described in the report. Regarding the broader topic we raised of refined pathways for elementary school math, PTA Council is working on suggestions around transparency, consistency, rigor, and progressions. On tonight's agenda, we welcome the introduction of the Linkit Parent Portal, and we appreciate the analysis being done to improve instructions. The presentation gives relative performance among the schools, but the winter benchmark chart showing simply % correct without more definition is not informative. PTA Council is concerned with the overall absolute learning and performance of the student body. We look forward to more information beyond the minimal amount provided. PTA Council notes the continued growth in the number of preschool students eligible for services under IDEA and the demand for lottery seat applicants. Perhaps it is time for the community or for a community-wide discussion on the future of preschool in Greenwich. Finally, if you hear a note of stridency and urgency in my voice tonight, that is a reflection of the academic and social emotional issues facing students because of COVID. Yet, we also need to look beyond the crisis to a time when normalcy returns. At that point, we want Greenwich Public Schools not to be recovering its excellence, but to have actually improved its quality. The time to start thinking about how to accomplish that is now. Thank you to our teachers and Greenwich Alliance for all that you do for our students, and thank you. Good night.
All right, thank you, Brian. All right, we are now going to move on to our community comments. Again, I'll remind speakers they each get 3 minutes. The clock will be up. Please keep to the 3 minutes. First up is Elizabeth DeHaven.
Good evening, Chairman Bernstein, Board of Education members, Dr. Jones, administration, and community. My name is Elizabeth DeHaven, and I am here this evening speaking on behalf of the North Mianus PTA as one of the co-presidents. Our kids are living through a pandemic. We as a community could not protect them from all the challenges they have had to overcome in the past year. They've exhibited a resilience that we didn't know they had. This resilience has been fostered and supported by their incredible teachers who have put their own mental health second to take care of our kids and the future of Greenwich. We now find our NMS teachers and students in a situation that has over 450 elementary students facing remote school or displacement for potentially the rest of the year. We, the NMS PTA, plead with the BOE, BET, RTM, and public to commit to not only allocating the funds and supports needed for our children to return to in-person learning and to rebuild North Mianus School, but ensure that all of our school buildings are safe and properly maintained to prevent these disruptive situations in the future. I, my co-president, Sarah Brzezinski, countless NMS PTA members, other fellow GPS PTA members, PTAC members, teachers, leaders, selectmen, select women, RTM, and BET members are all proud graduates of the Greenwich Public Schools. And we hope that we all as a community, whether we have children in the Greenwich Public School system or not, can commit to the children of Greenwich and recognize and support that these kids are the future of Greenwich. They need us all to allocate the funds to keep them in person, safe, and create spaces where they can reach their full potential. And hopefully be our future selectmen, select women, BET members, RTM, PTA, teachers, administrators, and Greenwich community members who continue to raise their families here. We, as the North Mianus School PTA, thank you all in advance for taking care of our kids and are here to help and support your efforts in any way that we can. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. The next speaker is Frances Nobe.
Hello?
Hi, Frances, we can hear you.
Hello, this is Frances Wunobe, co-chair PTAC Remote Schools Special Committee. I hope that you're faring well in this wintry weather. Tonight, our remote school learners send a shout out to the North Mianus school community for pivoting to temporary remote learning. We, longtime remote learners, are here to lend a hand and lend an ear. To the teachers, we see you rewriting your entire lesson plan for digital delivery. We know you're replying to 10 times more emails, and we feel your care and dedication to the kids. To the parents, grace to yourself and your family, grace to your kitchen. This is just one more blip in our pandemic life, and we will get through this with love, light, laughter, and yes, learning. Take pics for the yearbook, and if you have a good news story, please share through Thank a Teacher Online. And if you need help, please reach out. We are remote learning experts. Turning to academics, our remote school community says thank you to GPS for providing tonight's Linked presentation, which we understand is in response to parent worries about pandemic learning loss, aka COVID slide. We appreciate that the data includes a cut for our grade 2 to 5 remote learners. From our sneak peek, we are happy to see that remote learners appear to be performing above district averages in language arts and math, but as Brian Peldunas mentioned, we're eager to hear the presentation details. Moving to technology, our remote school community is grateful to GPS for providing tonight's digital learning environment update, specifically how to address the performance issues of the existing Chromebook. We look forward to hearing next steps and are happy to provide input to support the process. In the meanwhile, we recommend again that those students who are not able to provide themselves with a second device are supported by GPS. Lastly, as a mom of 3 kids home, and more home since early release on March 11, 2020, and Facebook mom to 650 plus remote learning families, I would like to make sure that you know that the vast majority of these remote learners by choice say they're doing good or excellent. For those that need help, resources are being made available. For the rest, Hugs at Home has been the best way to experience a pandemic. For all, partners like the Greenwich Alliance for Education have been a godsend. Next Friday, our remote learners will enjoy a GAE-funded virtual assembly in honor of Black History Month. So thank you very much for these options.
All right, thank you very much. The next speaker is Marla Cernick.
Ms. Cernick, if you could use the raise the hand function so we can find you in the list, please.
Marla, if you're with us, if you could raise your hand. All right, we'll skip Marla. We'll see if she's with us before we finish. We'll move on. Natalia D.
Same thing, Ms. D, if you could use the raise the hand function so we can see you in the list to elevate you.
Okay, we'll move on then. The next speaker is Stephanie Cowie. Steph, you can go ahead.
Great. Good evening, Chairman Bernstein, Superintendent Jones, and Board of Ed members. I'm Stephanie Cowie, and Terry Lamonti and I are currently the co-presidents at Greenwich High School. I want to recognize the North Mianus community following the flooding of their beloved school. We are thinking of you and wishing for a speedy return to in-person learning as soon as possible. We are very fortunate for the timing, given it was winter break. We hope future budget requests and decisions regarding general maintenance will be thoughtfully and carefully considered by the BET. With respect to the 2021-22 budget, we encourage the BET to support the operating capital budgets as presented by Dr. Jones. We understand everyone is aware of the technology and textbook needs at Greenwich High School, along with upgraded Chromebooks, all are equally important in the 21-22 budget to deliver high quality education. Whether we were in person or a hybrid of some kind in the fall, we absolutely need to be sure we are ready to meet the most pressing needs of our faculty and our students. Given the BET's recent comments regarding numerous capital projects in the district, we stand with our Greenwich High School community in support of 3 very important projects. These all speak to safety and security of our students and faculty. Number 1, Greenwich High School front entry. Project is paramount to secure our high school of close to 3,500 people. The building committee is prepared to move the project forward with your continued support. Number 2, there has been discussion that phase 2 of Cardinal Stadium project may be postponed for later years. We urge the Board of Ed to push for the completion of this entire project. The stadium should not be half-built. Phase 2, the remaining parts of the project, including visitor side bleachers, new visitor side building, and the important second egress exit roadway for Greenwich High School cannot be forgotten. Number 3, additionally, we fully support the remediation of our fields. The complete remediation and replacement of these fields over the next several years will create safe fields for the children of GHS and the greater Greenwich community. We support GHS on the needs for our students with the GHS Course of Study Guide. We continue to remain hopeful for our seniors and their families that they may be able to experience a wonderful graduation event. While nothing about this year has been normal and so many important milestones have been missed by our seniors, we hope we can all do our very best to provide a memorable experience for each of them. We thank you all for your continued efforts and support of our children, faculty, and administrators. The work you have done has certainly not gone unnoticed. Thank you all again. We appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. All right, the next speaker is Christina Fiorevanti.
Hi there. Ooh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Now we can. You might have had 2 microphones going. Go ahead.
I know, sorry. I joined on my iPad too. Okay, so my name is Christina Fiorevanti, and I am an educator in Greenwich Public Schools. I'm gonna just log off of this. Okay. I'm an educator in Greenwich Public Schools, and I've been at Riverside School for 13 years. And I've been a teacher in the Greenwich Remote Learning School now for this past year because of the pandemic. And I also forgot to say good evening to Dr. Jones and the cabinet and the Greenwich Public School community. So good evening. I guess the real reason why I'm coming on tonight is to have everybody think about Link It. As an educator, I see that there are many positives to it, and I see that there are some challenges to it. Before I get to those, I just want to say that my class this year in remote school are the most hardworking, caring, compassionate students. And I really wish that I was in the classroom with them this year, because every day they come to school with such a positive attitude. They're eager and ready to learn. And every day I tell them how proud I am of them, whether they take tests or not. I'm so proud of the way they help one another. So with that, I just want to go through some of the positives that I see as an educator. Getting the results of Link It and the data is truly amazing. I can see so many different things. I can group my students accordingly, both individually and small groups. I can use the data to differentiate many lessons, and I can see how they're doing. I think the questions are very well set up, similar to the SBA. So it will show and prepare our students for what the test would look like should we take it this year or beyond. And I know that this is our first year with Link It. So I'm willing to volunteer myself and work with other teachers on a committee to make it better for our students, or even work with the curriculum coordinators in our district. However, as an educator, the challenges are that the Link It is not measuring apples to apples. It's measuring apples to oranges. So in September, my third grade remote students took it, and I was able to see how well they understood material from second grade in language arts and math. And then they took it again in January, and there was different material on there altogether. And unfortunately, in the math Link It, out of 30 questions, 20 or 12 or 13 questions were not even taught yet. So my question, the big question is, what is the purpose of Link It? Is it a way to assess our students on certain benchmarks and check those off during the year to see how they grow and keep those benchmarks the same? Or, is it acting like a pre-test or as a post-test? That's where I need the clarification. As a parent in the district, I don't know how my child is doing. And lastly, just take into consideration the needs of special needs students, not just academic, but a lot of these children have occupational therapy or physical therapy or visual motor, and they really need help manipulating the test. They need practice tests given to them and how to understand what the test is all about and its features, not just being able to do well on a test and regurgitate information for us. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me, and have a great meeting.
Thank you very much. All right, the next speaker is Liz Tomasino.
Hi. Hi, my name is Liz Tomasino. I have 2 children in the Greenwich Public School District, and I'd like to address your priority of ADA compliance, HVAC, security, maintenance, and the structural safety for all GPS facilities and fields. Taxpayers paid $750,000 for a 182-page facilities master plan, which identifies priorities and key issues for each building. Under the BOE's current leadership, there has been no substantial progress. How is this effective planning? 6 members of the BOE recently voted to approve $27 million to renovate Julian Curtis, a 4-year project where enrollment is down by 14%. How is this a priority? Western Middle School fields have been untouched for 5 years. This graduating class will have never used their home field. What is leadership doing about it? Central Middle School was built in 1957 and has never been renovated. It's structurally unsound and the only building recommended for demolition and replacement, yet it's not scheduled for renovation or a rebuild until 2034. How is this appropriate planning? The BOE wants $4.8 million for phase 2 of the Cardinal Stadium project, the majority going to the expense of a new road, a new bridge, and moving tennis courts. How is this more important than having all our schools ADA compliant? Since 2007, the BOE has spent $7 million on capital improvements at North Mianus. Yet we all know what sadly happened last weekend. How is this effective maintenance? Because of the lack of proper facilities maintenance over the years, the GPS building insurance premiums have increased by 28% to $1.35 million annually. How could ADA be top priority when 6 members of the BOE voted to pass next year's budget without any ADA spending? It doesn't compute. Mr. Chairman, the superintendent and you please need to help the community understand where your priorities truly are. Based on these few examples, ADA compliance is not one of them. Neither are HVAC, structural safety, or maintenance. I would also like to remind you that you are elected to govern the GPS, not manage projects, build streets, remedy fields, renovate buildings, or impact your bias towards one particular project over the other. This is why there are building committees and paid employees at the administrative level. I think the community deserves to know when you will truly prioritize and plan on focusing on your elected purpose, which is education.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lester Smith.
Mr. Smith, if you could use the raise the hand function to identify yourself.
Not seeing a Lester Smith. Okay, we'll move on. The next speaker is James Waters.
Mr. Waters, you can go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, Board of Education members. My name is James Waters, and I have 2 sons at North Mianus School. I'd first like to applaud Dr. Jones, our teachers, and the Board of Education for their work in setting an example for our nation by getting our kids back in school in a safe manner. I would love to see you continue to spread the word on how you've done it so that others around the country may learn from your example. On the capital budget, I have 2 thoughts for the Board of Education. Number 1, I'd like the Board of Education to explain the key constraints to executing on the facilities master plan, which includes dramatically more spending on annual maintenance capital expenditures and major projects. I'm aware of the time constraints. That maintenance work must typically be done during the summer months when buildings aren't in use, but would like the BOE's perspective on what it will take to get back on track with our old and aging buildings. From what I've seen, the BOE has done a good job of prioritizing projects in a fiscally responsible manner, and the public needs to understand the constraints that are holding us back. Number 2, I think the public deserves to hear the Board of Education's perspective on the dramatic funding cuts to its proposed capital budgets over the last couple of years by the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Funding cuts that the public should know about. For FY 2020, the BOE proposed a $26.0 million capital budget and the BET approved $21.2 million, nearly a $5 million shortfall. For FY 2021, the BOE proposed a $35.8 million capital budget and BET approved $16.4 million, a $19 million shortfall. In FY 2021, the BET said it expected the BOE's FY 2022 capital budget to be $54.5 million and the overall town's general fund capital budget to be $134.6 million. Yet in October 2020, the BET set an FY 2022 guideline for the overall town capital budget at $55 million, nearly an $80 million shortfall from what it suggested just a few months prior. In FY 2022, The BOE proposed a $32 million capital budget, which was endorsed by the first selectman's town capital budget, but that the BET has not yet approved. We need to get on top of properly updating and maintaining our schools per the facilities master plan. The BOE perspective needs to be heard publicly, particularly if the BET continues to refuse to provide adequate funding, forcing us to kick projects down the road and putting our kids at risk.
That's time. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to circle back for the folks that we couldn't identify. Let's start with Marla Cernick. Marla, if you're on, if you could raise your hand on the attendee list. All right, not seeing Marla. Next, Natalie Adi. Natalie, I don't see you, and it doesn't appear you're raising your hand. And then last, Lester Smith. Well, sorry, we're not seeing them in the attendee list, nor are they raising their hands. They, of course, can submit their comments to the Board of Ed via email. At this point, this will close our community comments and public hearing, and we're going to move on to our monthly reports, starting with the superintendent update.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. I have a couple of items tonight. First of all, I just want to say thanks to individuals over February break that continued to work to keep our schools open and safe, especially to Mary Keller, who did work with Shemaine and her staff in HR to get our staff uploaded so that we are going to be prepared for the vaccine in the next coming weeks, once they start that process. I also just want to mention kindergarten orientation was today. So if we have anybody watching out there that has a neighbor, maybe it's their first child entering school, please have them reach out, even if they missed the orientation, because we are starting that time of the year, getting ready for next year. I also want to mention on the ADA, and I'm not going to belabor on it tonight. We did talk about it at the Finance Committee meeting earlier in the budget meeting earlier this week. We do have ADA funding in our budget every year. We do this current year. It's in our infrastructure, smaller projects. It's also in our major projects. And just to give a little bit of an idea, we have $446,000 in the budget this year for ADA compliance at Western. And this was before we really started talking about this year. Mr. Watson, through an RFP process, did a feasibility study to look at Western early this year, and that's been completed. We also, again, in this year's budget, have $178,000 for vertical transportation at Western. That work is currently ongoing and be installing in the summer. We also have at Coscop School, the playground replacement. We are slowly working through our playgrounds to change the surface to rubber so it's accessible. Also, some of the play equipment that needs to be upgraded. That was $394,000. At ISD, they have $74,000 in playground upgrades there. Again, this is what's ongoing right now, let alone the major projects like Cardinal, which has a very large ADA component to it. Also, North Miamis has $111,000. Riverside has $37,000. So all of these infrastructure, and they're specifically ADA projects, were approved by BET, RTM, BOE for this current year. So I just want to reassure the community that it is a really important issue, and it has been. And yes, we do have a lot of work still to go. The next, I think, big topic right now, some people may be watching tonight and not realize kind of how North Miamis has developed today. So we have had engineers at North Miamis looking and investigating exactly at what happened. And I'm going to turn it over in just a moment to Dan Watson, but I do want to note our principals at Riverside, OG, and Riverside, OG, and JC sent a message out about an hour before this meeting to let their families know that those buildings are going to go remote tomorrow. And that is at the advice, obviously, of engineers who have been looking at what's going on possibly with ceiling issues at North Mianus. Those 3 buildings are older buildings, similar construction. And so they are going full remote so that the inspections can be carried out. And we received a letter from the building inspector tonight that directs us exactly how that work needs to be conducted. So it's really 4 buildings now that are going to at least be impacted until the investigations are finished. Mr. Watson, do you want to chime in? You're much more articulate than I am.
Tony, I think you hit everything that I was going to touch on. Just to be clear, we are still doing an investigation at North Mianus. The original thought that a pipe burst and caused the ceiling to collapse is probably inaccurate. The thinking now is that the ceiling, because of the age of the ceiling and because of the different components that have been attached to that ceiling structure over the years, may have caused an overweight issue to it. We're talking, a building that was installed and created in, I think it was 1925. It opened. It's a very thick plaster ceiling that was attached to the original wood joists with nails, and subsequent renovations of the building included adding sprinklers that, for whatever reason, those sprinklers were just attached to the ceiling rather than to the structure of the building. So that added more weight to the ceiling. So we still don't have 100% confirmation that that is in fact the issue. We are, as Dr. Jones pointed out, we're going to be doing some testing this weekend, starting on Saturday, where we have an engineering firm coming in and doing what's called a pull test on nails in other parts of the building, the nails that hold up the roof, hold up the ceiling structure. So it's going to be a little while before we get test results, and we are going to be testing other schools that have similar construction. Again, those being JC, Old Greenwich, and Riverside. So we're going to be in there all next week. I don't have a definitive date when we're going to have any answers, but we're on top of it. So.
Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Anything else, Dr. Jones?
No, that's all I have for tonight. I think that's enough.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So the OG, JC, Riverside, that's just out of an abundance of caution based upon the construction of the schools. Obviously, they're all a bit older. So that's the reasoning behind it by the engineer in the building department?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully we can minimize the disruption and get positive findings out of that. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure. So Dan, as part of what you're looking at in the investigation, or are we looking at it to determine when this started? So I know we were all out for the vacation week last week. Is it possible that if we actually had been in school, we would have caught the leak sooner?
Again, the feeling right now is it wasn't a leak. It was the actual ceiling that let go. And as the ceiling collapsed, it severed the sprinkler line. So again, we're gonna have to wait to do a forensics test on the sprinkler line. But by looking at it, it's a shear cut rather than if it was a burst due to like a cold snap, the actual pipe would be deformed.
Okay. Yeah, I want to, I obviously, I think that that's important to figure out. And I think as part of the investigation and looking at the other schools as well, is to figure out, if someone had been in the building, would we have been able to figure this out sooner, or how this actually happened? So I think that that's important to get as soon as possible.
Mr. Scher.
Tony, I'm very confused about something you said tonight. You rattled off roughly, I don't know what, $1 million in ADA investments. And you have a long list of projects that you've categorized. We reviewed, and your team and you presented a capital budget at our December meeting. You at that time presented detailed project sheets that we had to vote on and approve as a board. I asked you, which was deferred to our CFO, a very specific question about item by item in the budget. Where was spending on ADA? The question was deferred to Dan Watson. And he said very clearly, it's in the minutes and on tape, that there is no money in this budget for ADA. So I don't know how to reconcile these two statements. I mean, the representation of the administration in December very clearly in a public meeting was there were no dollars. So I don't know what happened. Did we go back and try to recategorize things, or what happened?
No, actually, if you look in the budget book, last year's budget book is probably even easier to see than this year, where it actually listed ADA right next to and it's where all the infrastructure projects are. When you look at it this year, you'll see things like lift, and you can see the ADA, but it was really easy to see last year. So no, it was in there, but I think at that meeting too, there was confusion, because I think I didn't really understand what you were asking for that evening when you were asking for 3 million and you were referencing the master plan. And I wasn't really sure which page of the master plan. So yes, there was confusion that night. I absolutely acknowledge that. I was not prepared for that at the 11th hour of the budget cycle.
Yeah, that's not really my question, Tony. My question is, the administration said very clearly in the meeting of what they presented, not what we proposed to add. The question was asked about what was presented. And the presentation was from the administration. And the administration said very clearly in that meeting that because very detailed, we listed categories. We said, where is the ADA funding? And the answer of the administration was, there are $0. So how did that answer change? Did you guys not know what was in the budget, or?
No, that's what I'm trying to say. I'll have to go back and watch the tape. But if I answered incorrectly, I answered incorrectly. But I can tell you that we all know, everybody does, that JC has it is not ADA accessible. So we know that that's in the capital project. We know that Cardinal's in the project, which has a huge ADA component. So the way that we answered that evening, I do think that you had referenced the master plan, and I wasn't sure actually what you were asking. So I did go back the next day to pull out where you got that number of the 3 million.
Yeah, Tony, I'll say this again. I'm not asking, I'm gonna say this one more time and I'm gonna let this go. Please do not conflate and confuse two different things. This is creating confusion for the board and is creating confusion for the public. The question that was asked was your proposal as the superintendent. The question about whether the master plan and the rest of it is a totally separate item. So please do not confuse everyone by trying to connect two issues that are not connected. The question that was to the administration was the proposal you made that you asked us to approve from the administration said, please spend $37 million before Kathleen Stowe recommended any changes, some of which were accepted. The question to the administration was, where in this proposal are dollars for ADA? The administration says very clearly in that meeting to that question, there are no dollars. So if you need to go back and review what it is you guys presented and the questions about your proposal, we really need that clarification, because that's what the community heard. That's what everyone heard that loud and clear in that meeting. And now all of a sudden we're saying, well, we went back through the budget And all of a sudden we see a bunch of items that now add up to, I get almost $1 million from the math you just laid out, that said, oh no, we're remediating our buildings and here's all of a sudden $1 million in ADA spending. As a board member, I can't, and I don't know about the others, I can't operate in an environment and properly govern on behalf of the town of Greenwich, who elected us, if the information is going to so radically change meeting to meeting. That can't be. And the administration has to do a better job in presenting. These are budgets that came from the administrators. I mean, Mr. Waters tonight goes on and on about the budgets as presented by the superintendent. I asked you a question about the budget you presented, and you gave an answer. But here we are now hearing completely different answers. I need you to go back and figure this out, because I personally can't live in a world with these kinds of disconnects. It doesn't help us as board members effectively govern the school system.
I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be sure that everybody understands that ADA is in the budget and infrastructure and major projects. And I do think that most people do understand that JC, especially Cardinal, are huge ADA projects for us. I don't
Cardinal Stadium, this budget doesn't.
Peter, we're not
have
going to
any
do the
dollars.
back and forth.
Oh my God.
Back and forth.
We're just saying things that are misleading, Peter.
Okay, I have a different recollection. Tony has said she'll go back and look. We're going to move on. Ms. Stowe.
So I'm going to go back to sort of the big news that was dropped on us tonight, Tony. And I know that you mentioned that there was a letter from the town. First, let me take a step back. We had a finance meeting this week. We talked about North Mianus at length. We were just going to talk about operating and how the meetings went with the BET and Capitol. And naturally, as we got into Capitol, we couldn't help but sort of focus on North Mianus and what was happening there. One of the things we learned, and I know that Joe asked some and Christina asked some good questions in that meeting, is that, well, first of all, that our goal, your goal as the administration, is to try to find a way to get these kids back to school in some manner, whether it be at North Mianus if there are classrooms that are safe, or someplace else throughout the district. And I know that you mentioned then that the challenge, of course, is that what we're able to do, and Ralph did such a great job with for Cos Cob, and I remember that so well because we were lucky enough to have some of those kids come to Parkway and Old Greenwich. The challenge, of course, now is COVID, right, and social distancing. And so that sort of adds to the headache that you're going through. But just as a sort of, I know the North Mianus community really wants to hear it, and I know it's a priority of you guys. But now we sort of quadruple the problem, maybe, hopefully not, with, and I think it's prudent, obviously, out of the abundance of caution. And I appreciate that the engineers and the town are weighing in on this, that Old Greenwich, Riverside, and Julian Curtis, which have always been at the top, frankly, of the master facility plan because of the age of the schools, need to be investigated. But so with that as background, one of the things I want to direct to you, Dan, and I know that this is a preliminary, but because you talked about in the finance meeting, one of the things you mentioned of the issues with North Mianus as you sort of, as you're looking at it, and as the investigators might find, although it has not yet been determined, that this was a weight issue, right? That potentially the ceiling fell because there were 3 layers of plaster, other things sort of directly attached to it, and then pieces of the drop ceiling was even attached then to the plaster. I guess as we go into the other schools, can you just explain to me how quickly, if you get a sense, we could analyze, I guess what is it a load bearing issue? And that's how you can then assess those 3 schools quickly to see if it's safe for hopefully our children to re-enter and not have to shut those schools down for a long term, so we can just sort of deal with the North Mianus students on their own.
So the short answer is no. I can't give you a timeline. We haven't really had the engineers go out and do a pull test like I had mentioned they're going to be at North Mianus on Saturday morning. The other component that could cause us some delays is ceilings like this, original ceilings, plaster ceilings may have an asbestos issue. And we have to test for that first. We were fortunate enough that the ceiling at North Mianus did not have any asbestos present. So the first thing we're going to do at the other schools is confirm that. So along with our engineering group that's coming in and our contractor, we also have our environmental consultant who's going to do a rush test on the areas. So, you know, doing the actual pull test at each school, it may take a day per school, and I'm just guessing at this point. I don't know how quickly we can get the results back. I'll try to have more information after our on-site meeting on Saturday.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Kowalski, you've gone once, so I'm gonna come back to you if that's all right.
Sure, that's fine.
Thank you. Ms. Olson?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. So first one, in terms of the school, so basically what we're saying is that all of the elementary schools in Eastern Greenwich, other than let's say Dundee, looks like they're going to be out of commission for some period of time during this investigation. Is this something, I think Kathleen was asked this, is this something that can be, just to clarify, did we say 1 week remote, or like what it's going to look like, how long that initial sort of testing is going to look like for those other 3 schools?
I don't have a timeline right now. I don't know if Dr. Jones wants to weigh in.
Yeah, we don't know until they actually go in and start to inspect the building. We just don't know.
Okay, because it's big news for those parents. So they'll want to know, you know, is this something they're going to go in for a day, or should they, so that they can at least plan, you know, the parents that now are going to have kids remote. We have a lot of working parents in this community to be able to figure that out. I think they need to know at least up front, like we're looking at this long possible, or even if it needs to be lengthened, but something to work with from the very beginning, because there's a lot of people scrambling, I imagine, parents scrambling to figure out the childcare situation.
Yeah, we did message in our note tonight that it was through next week. I will say though, as I've done with 2 of the breaks that we've previously had, tried to find satellite areas for those families who have a hardship. I found out too late today to really start thinking about that. I needed to message the parents first that there were, you know, we were going to be in remote, but I will be working on that first thing tomorrow morning to see if there's a plan that I can create and work with some partners to have a hardship site for those families that need it.
Okay, and just trying to think outside the box, because there are so many this affects so many families. And we're talking about young learners when we talk about remote, which I know is, you know, it's like big news we're all getting tonight, right? But is there another option? Is there another site? Like if Carmel Academy is not being utilized, is there a place where we can get these learners sooner than later? Have we investigated those options, or are we currently investigating those options?
You know, I feel like we had a little bit of lead. Maybe this is why it happened this way, but in the summer we were looking for alternate sites just in case, as we were looking at social distancing and getting our schools open. We're committed to that, and we still are. So we had done, Dr. Carabillo and I had toured all of Carmel, and we actually pulled out all of those floor plans again, I think yesterday afternoon. But most of the rooms are only 550 square feet, which is not enough to have social distancing inside kind of that space. There's very few rooms that would work, and we would not want to relocate just like 4 classrooms on an unusual campus without, you know, our administrators and people there. So we're looking at all options. I'm making a lot of phone calls and looking at everything we can to be as proactive to have a plan. Our principals had also shared where there's a little bit of space within the district, but 2 of those 3 buildings that we just found this out about tonight had some of those rooms. So we are working on it.
All right, and we're all just sort of like getting this, we're problem solving together, but what about, you know, our students that are most at risk, all of our special needs students? You know, if you have those classrooms available, let's say at Carmel, I just want to give you some other ideas, and we have our students that have more high needs. that might be an option if it is only 4 classrooms or whatever. But I think we need to really think about what we can do for our most vulnerable students at this time, sooner than later. My other question is more of just a big picture question, because, we've heard this and we've received emails from community members around this, but, I don't necessarily play the political game. I never really have. And I'm just looking at I don't understand why we don't just ask for more spending for what we actually need. We have buildings now that are collapsing, literally like crumbling or collapsing, so because we've I don't want to say we, but through the town processes have not received the funding to be able to maintain our schools. So the town of Greenwich not receiving funds from the BT has ultimately has failed our students. And I think someone had mentioned it. I think Karen Kowalski had asked the question, was the sprinkler, was it the roof, or would it have been solved sooner if someone was there? And I'm thinking, well, thank God maybe someone wasn't there in that actual room, right? I mean, we need to care for the safety of these students first. So I guess maybe it's to Tony, maybe it's to whoever wants to answer it, but why we don't actually, whether it gets denied or not, ask for what we truly need to maintain our buildings. I just don't quite understand that. I would ask for what I need.
Thank you. Ms. Hirsch?
I should have taken my hand down. The questions I had were asked.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
The question I'm about to ask, I'd like an answer from both Tony and Dan. Probably don't have to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I want to hear the answer. No child or teacher will be entering a classroom that we are suspicious is not safe. Can I have a confirmation on both of you on that one, please?
Yes, you're correct.
Correct.
Thank you. Sorry to have to ask.
Or custodians or any staff members.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave anybody out, of course, but I figured construction workers will have hard hats on, so they'll be safe and expecting things like that. But okay, including everybody who could be at risk. Thank you for that answer.
All right, Miss Downey.
I just want to, I know everyone feels similarly that we're very upset that we're in this position with North Mianus. But I think one thing that this situation really crystallizes is precisely why we need to be focusing on wholesale renovation of these older school buildings, like Julian Curtis, like Old Greenwich, like Riverside, who are now going to be going remote, because it's not just putting a Band-Aid on these. I know some people who are looking to save money say, oh, well, we'll just fix these 5 things. I don't think it's as simple as that. And I think the North Mianus situation, as awful as it is, really crystallizes that and brings it forward so that people really have to think about buildings as a whole and doing everything soup to nuts when we're doing them. Just wanted to make that point. I have a question to Dan and to Tony. I don't know if Sean's on tonight. In terms of these additional builds, I mean, obviously the stuff relating to North Mianus, we have insurance coverage. However, for these additional buildings, Julian Curtis, Old Greenwich, and Riverside, how are we going to handle the process and the costs of doing those? And what do we need to be thinking about board-wise from that perspective going forward?
For me, and Sean, feel free to chime in from the finance side, but it's still too early because we just don't know what we don't know. And we really have to get through some of this investigative. I'll give you an example. If we had to rent property for relocation, will the insurance cover that? So I'm waiting on the town risk management to answer that question for me. So we have a lot of questions. We have more questions than we do answers right now.
And do we need funds fronted in order to just even engaging these engineers, right? These are unforeseen costs. And obviously, again, North Mianus is covered, presumably by the insurance. But in terms of the other buildings, how are we paying the engineers, or, that seems, I know that doesn't solve the long-term stuff, but the short-term, or I don't know, Sean, maybe you can speak to that. That seems to be your purview.
I mean, I agree that there's a lot more to know. This is all late breaking news. I would tell you that North Mianus, once you hit your deductible, we should be covered for all expenses for repairs. If we have to rent buildings, that should be covered as well. Any expenses related to the collapse of the ceiling. As it relates to the other buildings that we're looking into, that could be a different story entirely. But we need to get into it a little bit more.
And our deductible is how much? Just to clarify.
I believe it's 100.
Okay, thank you.
And Christina, just process-wise for emergencies, what we've been advised by the town to do, and sadly we've had to do this a bunch of times. We have to use our operating funds basically to get the immediate remediation work started, and then at that point, once we know the figures, we would go for an interim replenish that, and the insurance money would then go directly to the town.
So we would just do like a budget transfer kind of thing within our operating funds to pay for it, and then request.
That's exactly right.
The interim.
Okay. We request money to replenish the
operating funds that we've depleted.
Goes to the town to replenish their funds that they get.
Okay.
So
okay. Thank you.
Process for that. Sure. Ms. Kowalski.
Harvey. Sure. So I had 2 points. Just going back to North Mianus, and also to address something that Christina had mentioned. Look, despite what happened at North Mianus, I don't think the answer to this is the wholesale, revamping of all of these schools, because as we find out, you end up building a school or to handle of a project of $27 to $30 million. We can't do that every year. So that means we deal with one school for $27 to $30 million, and then that we have capital tied up for that for a multiple of years, and then we move on to the next school. We have 15 schools. I think that's the wrong way to address it. I think what needs to happen, and we need to take a harder look at, is the amount that's allocated for maintenance every year. Right? There needs to be an adjustment in how we are handling schools, and even aging schools, by that purpose. And it's not fixing projects, put a Band-Aid here, put a Band-Aid there. I've never suggested that, but I also think that we're not applying enough capital into our overall maintenance to address issues at the schools. Because remind you, if Julian Curtis passes, we have that tied up, and then next year, the following year, we'll have Old Greenwich that's also at $20 to $25 million. And then you have other schools. But what happens in the interim to the other schools while we're fixing these schools? We're not addressing those problems, and there will never be enough money in the maintenance that we put forward in our capital plan to address all of these issues, and we won't get to them in time. All of us will be recycled off the board, if not dead, before we get to the final school. In the meantime, another school, as Ms. Olson has commented, is going to collapse before we can get to it, because we haven't addressed these in the maintenance issues. That's my comment on there. As we go back to the ADA issue, just for clarification, Tony, I've been flipping through this budget, as you mentioned it, that it's in here, and I've been flipping through the 319 pages and the line items. And obviously, I'm not going to ask you to do it tonight, but if you could send an email to the board that identifies the amounts that you've specified tonight, where there was 440,000 for ADA at Western, the feasibility study, I'd like to know where that was in the budget and how that got approved, because I'm not aware of the board approving a feasibility study for ADA other than what was done in the capital, what is that plan called? The master facilities plan, as well as the other costs you mentioned, and I didn't write them all down, I don't think, as you were rattling them off, but you also mentioned 178,000 for a vertical lift at Western Cobb School. You mentioned 394,000, and you also mentioned at ISD 74,000. If you could identify those in the line items of the budget, how they are addressed to ADA, and can send an email to the board this week, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, it's actually in a Q&A you'll get. We've already answered that one because somebody else asked that. So probably by the end of the week, you'll have that Q&A.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. I guess I want to say, I think we are conflating two issues here. This isn't simple maintenance, right? This is a 1925 building where at some point people loaded on top of things, previous generations, we've inherited this. And basically it was sight unseen, right? Covered by a drop ceiling. That's not really a maintenance issue. I think it's a longer term approach. And it is certainly why why we've prioritized doing some of the schools that we've prioritized. I guess the other learning from the master facilities plan is we do underfund maintenance, right? That is the separate issue, but it is something that we have looked at, something that we've been told. Part of our challenge again is the summer months are short. And the longer we go in the school year, the less time there is to get stuff done. We just had a discussion with the BET about projects that sometimes take 2 and 3 years. And so the cycle to get things done is longer, and they don't love having the money sitting on the books if you're not using it. So it's a struggle to figure out what's right, but we certainly need to. I think somebody used the word unfortunate. It is completely unfortunate. I think, Christina, I'm basically where you are. Our average building age is 1957. Like, we've got to get real about the fact that if we want these buildings to last 50 more years or 75 more years, it really is about getting to the point where we can see these things that are hidden behind the walls and in the ceilings and knowing what needs to be repaired. We can't just keep doing this piecemeal. It doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, Mr. Sheriff, I see your hand.
Peter, you're on mute if you're talking.
I think we lost him.
No, he's here. It's just on mute.
We have to be able, I agree, we have to be careful not to conflate this. And as Ms. Olson said, we have to avoid the politics of this, right? The reality of it is, first of all, I want to say, I actually think Tony Jones is doing the right thing in proactively and carefully, regardless of what the inconvenience is, prioritizing safety of children. And if that means they have to go remote and they have to be inconvenienced, I'd much rather have that than expose them to a situation where an accident could happen because we don't really know what's going on. That's part one. Part two is, I agree with what Dan Watson said. Everybody jumping to conclusions, doing Olympic style conclusion jumping or Olympic quality conclusion jumping, which we're pretty good at in our town, without knowing actually what happened. I know there were firemen, for example, circulating pictures that have been widely circulated. There have been people, going on and on about, what the rumor mill is rampant about what actually happened. I really think we need the facts and we need the forensics before everybody conclusion jumps. I do think, however, with this said is, I've said this to board members many times, and particularly all those of you who are newer. You've heard me say this on the board a couple times. And I know many of you roll your eyes, and it's okay. I'm a big boy. I got thick skin. We never really completed the master plan. We never really internalized everything that we were told by architects and engineers. Now we've got a cast of administrators who want to ignore that and do it over. That doesn't make any sense to me. We have qualified people who've given us very solid, specific information about our buildings. And, we tend to take it off the shelf when something like this happens, but we don't stick to it and really make it a part of our management system. I think we do have to look at how we're resourced and the skills of the people we have managing our buildings. We have reports. We've been audited. And we had one meeting on the audit findings, and since then, the board hasn't talked about any of it. The other thing is I've been on this board a long time, and there are many capital budgets that I have voted against, and I don't mind being the only member voting. But in many cases, I voted no because most of the board wanted a vanity project instead of investing in what was not exciting, which is maintenance. I can remember, so none of you will be here, it was just me. I can remember being on this board when the MISA project skyrocketed to 37 million. And the only way that project got approved is there was a deal made between then leadership of the board and then leadership of the BET to cut back maintenance. So this idea that we can get into this blame game with other parts of town government is just not recognizing the facts. And I would hope that we would take this event, which is very alarming, and commit ourselves to dig in on this, not delegate it to the administration. Oh, it's the superintendent's problem. You know, let it spin up for 30 days, particularly when we get through the budget cycle with the BET. Use it as a club politically with one group or another. I would hope we would say, let's dedicate some time in the next 4 months, each month that we're here. And we, the board, should properly be doing our work on the master plan. We should properly be doing our work on what is it we need to do? Are we making the right choices? You know, I'll leave it at this. This lays with the board. Trying to point fingers at anybody else, not helpful. We made these decisions, or our predecessors made these decisions to invest in projects like MISA, New Lebanon, Cardinal Stadium, other things. We prioritize turf fields over maintenance. So we need to be honest with ourselves, what we're doing and the role that we're playing in this. And I think there's an opportunity to move forward in a positive way, rather than digress into this game of pointing fingers at, I don't know, the BET, the RTM, somebody else. Not helpful, and doesn't move our town forward, and doesn't advance safe schools for our kids. Just a point of view.
Thank you, Peter. I guess I'll share my point of view, which is every year we get a letter from the BET. We also get one from the BOC, mind you, but we get a letter from the BET that lays out their budget goals for the year. And part of their budget goals is what they believe the annual capital spending should be. And God forbid we ever go over that. And, you know, we've had that situation, and what we see is a wholesale cutting of our projects. We as a town, not just one body, we as a town need to come to grips with what is it we need to get done. We have a lot of priorities. And, you know, if we make one thing a priority over another, something suffers. If we kick the can down the road on a project, it comes back more expensive later. And there's always another project right behind it. You know, this is not an easy topic. It's not an easy one for our board. I don't think we can go it alone. I really do think it's a community conversation. It's got to involve the BET. It's got to involve the RTM. It's got to involve parents. Because I think that this is going to, depending on the learnings from this investigation, it's going to have long-term impacts. And I think we need to be prepared for that. All right, Ms. Olson, and then we're going to close it out and move on.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to, sometimes words can get minced and words can get put in each other's mouths. So I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't, when I was speaking, I wasn't placing a blame game, but I did just ask simply, how much money do we need? And why don't we just ask for it? And nobody answered me. But that was the question I put out there. I don't know, Peter or Tony, like, how much do we actually need and why aren't we asking for it? That was my question. It got unanswered.
All I can give you is my opinion. Tony, Sean spent Friday with the BET, full day with them. I was very, very clear that we underspend on capital. We need to spend more. I was clear about the age of our buildings. You know, do we need to spend more? We've heard we need to spend more. Can we spend more? You know, there's a capacity question because of the summer issue. And can we do projects with kids in the schools? And I just think there's a lot of moving parts here. There's also the bigger question of what will the town absorb? We do every year take that budget guidance letter from the BET. We take it very seriously, right? We are a large part of the town budget, and we try to manage that as best we can. Are we doing everything we need to? It's hard to say, right? Because again, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I worry that sometimes we forget that, and we try to move things to the top of the queue, or we push things too far down. I have a suspicion that, we're not going to get everything we asked for this year. We will get a lot of the maintenance we asked for. The bigger projects, maybe not. And they're put up, by the way, it becomes a battle because the town's got projects as well that they want to move on. So there's a lot of moving parts. I go back to my previous comments. This has got to be a larger community conversation, right? This isn't just about the Board of Ed. Our buildings are super important, right? We teach our kids in them. We trust that the buildings are going to be safe and the air quality is going to be great and all the rest of it. And they're going to be accessible. And are we there? No, we're not there. And we have to move in that direction. I think we move a little closer every year, but the line keeps moving on us. And that's what I worry about. And, I said it before, and Peter made reference, right? We're stuck with the decisions of prior generations. And so some of these buildings, there's a lot you can't see. When we took down New Lab, we've done abatement projects in the district basically every year. It's always in our budget. And they take out the known issues, and they've been doing that for years. It's the stuff you don't know about, right? And that's what worries me. It's a tough thing, right? You discover it as you go. And this is one of those things that we've now discovered, and we've got to go look at it. And so, I know it's been said, but as much as a pain it is for those communities, I'd rather take a couple of days and make sure the buildings are safe for everybody. I want the kids back in the buildings. So much work went into that this year. They deserve to be there, and we've got to get them there. But let's let the work happen. Let's let the discussion happen in the community. Our budget is in front of the BET Budget Committee. It will go on to the BET, and it will go on to the RTM. I'm sure we're going to be having similar conversations with them. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep those conversations going. All right, with that, we're going to move on to reports of officers, committees, and liaisons. So if you've got a report, please raise your hand. Mr. Kelly, you have a fast finger.
Yes, I know and fully understand that there are many projects, and we talked about things that need to be done, but pardon my enthusiasm about the project that you guys have asked me to work on, and that we're trying to get to the finish line. It's been a long time, but we're getting close. We're cooking with gasoline. We just got the clearance from our BET Budget Committee, the last bit of money we need to sign the contracts to get things going. We have everything lined up. The fabrication of the bleachers, that's in progress, nearing completion. We have now we have the authorization of will on the full BET meeting on Monday to actually hire the contractor in order to get this project started. Once we get started, we're going to move as quickly as possible. We're going to try to get our incredibly positive and enthusiastic group moving forward. I called Fred Camillo, our first selectman today. I said, we're crunched on time here. We're trying to get this thing done for graduation. And we're told that it's a stretch to get to graduation or get in under graduation. But I called Fred and I said, Fred, those TV shows when they build a house for the veteran or the disabled person in 1 week, and they move the bus out of the way, and the people are there watching the building get done. All those things usually take 6 months to a year, get done in a week. You know what? I said, Fred, let's try to get our town together and work together on making sure we can get this thing done in time for graduation. I know it's a stretch. Dan Watson warned me not to say it's a possibility, but you know what? As far as I'm concerned, nothing's impossible. He said he's going to work his best. Dan, you're going to call Fred. He said he's going to work with you to try to expedite speedy inspections by the town building committee. We're not going to cut any corners, of course, but we're going to try to get those inspections done really fast so we can get this thing done like those TV shows where we get it, move that bus out of the way and get it done. We got a great crew of people waiting to get started. Tony's been incredibly supportive. Sean has been incredible. Dan, keep it up, man. Keep that work going. Keep that positive attitude. Russ, our architect, they're all working for this. We're ready to get going. We're going to have a groundbreaking ceremony the beginning of March. That'll be our start to get things going. And hopefully this thing will get done on time, under budget, before schedule. That's what we're hoping to do. So once again, pardon my enthusiasm.
Now, Joe, love your enthusiasm. I think we could use a little of that in everything we do. All right,
Peter,
Ms.
there's
Olson.
one more thing I need to add. I forgot to talk about something, if I may.
Please.
Phase 2 also needs to be addressed as well, which is a project which you guys have also asked me to work on. I am not stopping, nor is our team of people that are trying to work together to get phase 2, the road, visitor side, bleachers, to get that thing done. We are going to work as hard as we can to get that done. We know we have obstacles, and we're going to try to get through those obstacles, but everyone's on target to make sure we get phase 2 going as well. We're not separating the two. One is not more important than the other as far as that goes. So we will also be pushing as best we can to get phase 2 as soon as possible.
All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Olson.
All right, two committees to report about. First, Greenwich Alliance. A couple of important dates. First, the Reaching Out grant is open and seeking proposals from all GPS educators. The deadline for that is for submission is March 26th. The Alliance is also asking for our support on the following 2 events. First is Fairfield County's Giving Day. That's February 25th. I'm sure you'll see e-blasts coming your way, asking you to donate $10. Trying to raise money on that particular day on Giving Day, the 25th. An exciting, fun opportunity is coming up. Carol Sutton mentioned it earlier in her remarks. The Trivia Challenge, that is March 19th. You don't want to miss it. It's a virtual event this year, and that's an important fundraiser for the Alliance. So please sign up for that. The funds raised go for Greenwich Public School teachers and students. And then finally, Avid Success. The Alliance newest initiative just received a grant for $18,000 from FCCF. And this will help our Avid students in both high school and college with professional skill building, mentoring, coaching, and good money habits. So a lot of great things happening on the horizon with Greenwich Alliance. And if anyone has any questions, they should contact Julie Freniars. I think I did better with her last name this time. She'll let me know. Last time I totally butchered it. And then Distinguished Teachers Awards Committee. Sorry, I have all my computers up so I don't miss anything important. Nomination deadlines are March 11th. And once again, also all online this year. So please visit the GPS website, click on Nominate a Teacher, and under the leadership of Kathy Bernetti, and then Vicky Capiali had posted a video that is full explanation of all the relevant information, nominations, any information you need for nominations are all posted on this site. And it will be, like I said, all online this year. March 11th is the deadline, but go ahead and nominate. Don't wait till March 10th, although it'll take them any time, but go ahead and nominate now. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Ms. Stowe.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we had a budget committee meeting earlier this week. And the first part of it was basically for Tony to update us on what had happened at the BET budget committee on last Friday, I guess now. And so she gave us a big update there. Obviously, it was a productive meeting, talked a lot about operating and capital. And then, as I mentioned, our focus then quickly turned to North Mianus and, of course, impending capital issues there. One other thing that I'm going to mention is that we also talked a little bit, and Joe, we're going to go into this down the road at one point. We talked a little bit about asset value, but what it sort of struck me as we were having this prior conversation. When KG&D did their study and they looked at the asset value of our buildings, they then sort of took a percentage, right? And that was the concept, is that you have your assets and you apply a percentage to sort of come up with your maintenance, right? And the recommendation, it was a wide range, but needless to say, even the low end of the range is not anything we've ever gotten near. It was 18 to 15 million that they would, based on our 15 buildings asset value, that we should likely spend a year in maintenance. Now, historically, we've been around 10. This year, we've asked for 12. And I think that this doesn't need to be political. I think you just need to make a financial assessment. I mean, you all own a home. If you underfund maintenance, you will by nature have big blips here and there. And that's the trade-off you can make. I'm the type of person that would rather sort of keep up with the maintenance of my home and then not have like a sort of unforeseen capital expenditure. But if we choose to go in another direction, which has been sort of how we've done it previously, that will happen. And financially, you can do a sort of a cash flow analysis and see where you end up. But that was a recommendation provided. We know that we've been underfunding maintenance. And if that is the choice that the town makes, there will likely be these unexpected blips. That's something we should continue to analyze. Obviously, we don't control the exact funding, but it's something that we should just continue to look at. And I know we talked a little bit about at our finance meeting. So I just wanted to raise that, and we will move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Downey.
I just wanted to let the board know, the policy committee, we are still working on our retiring of old policies. We're hoping that we will have something in hand for the board for the March 11th workshop, board retreat, whatever we're calling those meetings. That is our plan. So the committee is meeting on that and other issues. And then just in terms of the GHS entryway, we're putting together an RFP to hire an architect to move the project along, which obviously is not a project that would be happening during the summer of 21, more likely summer of 22. That's it.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to our first discussion item. I know we've got a lot of guests from the district tonight. So this is the AOP Elementary and Secondary Science Update. So Mr. D'Amico, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Bernstein. Welcome, everyone. And before I turn over the presentation to Bonnie O'Regan, I just have to point out that today's a great day for science, and hopefully the successful landing of the Mars Perseverance rover inspires future generations of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. So I just want to say I think it's only apropos to highlight that historic moment in science today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie O'Regan, who's going to give you an elementary update, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Good evening. I'm happy to join you once again to give you an update on another component of the
Bonnie, can you move a little closer to the microphone? We're having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm happy to join you once again to give you an update on another component of the Advanced Learning Program. As you recall, in October of 2020, I reported to the Board of Ed the salient findings and recommendations from the external review of the program. The reviewers found that overwhelmingly all stakeholder groups expressed frustration with the push-in model for elementary science. This was echoed by the Board of Education in October of 2019, and an action plan was put into place to return to a pull-out service model for grades 3 through 5 Alps science. I'm sorry, I should have had you turn the slide over. Sorry, I'm used to doing it myself. This year, the Alps students received all of their science instruction within the cohort super block. At this point, pending any future restrictions, the Alp Enrichment Science will return to a pull-out program, which consists of 90 minutes of science enrichment instruction per week. The enrichment will focus on the science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts, which you will hear more about later from the middle school teachers presenting this evening. As reported in October, many stakeholder groups felt that this pre-COVID pull-out replacement core model for elementary math and reading worked well, with some exceptions. Next slide. The use of the 90-minute super blocks for STEM and humanities instructions this year eliminated one of the most salient objections to the pre-COVID pull-out program that emerged: how it dictated the schedule for the rest of the school. One contributing factor is the limiting nature of the schedule is that while general education students have a 90-minute humanities block, Alps students have only 60 minutes per day allocated for reading, and their 30 minutes of writing instruction takes place in their general education classroom. As you can imagine, this can be challenging for students and teachers. Paramount is that reading, writing, and social studies is now one thing. Out teaching only reading is not best for students or for teachers. The STEM and the humanities blocks allows teachers the flexibility to blend the reading and writing or math and science instruction and be less disruptive to the entire building schedule. Next slide. In October, a recommended action for future consideration was to expand the pre-COVID 60-minute ALP reading block to a full 90-minute humanities block with a 90-minute STEM block to parallel the STEM and humanities blocks in the general education classroom. This action would require an increase from the pre-COVID 1.7 staff allocation per building to 2 full-time staff members in each building. The total addition can be done by utilizing the current part-time staff in each of the buildings and hiring an additional 1.3 teachers. I'm now going to turn this over to Jen Bressler, who will talk about the middle school program.
Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you for this opportunity to present our middle school science curriculum. I'm an instructional coach and I work with all 3 middle schools in the district, and we are very proud to offer an engaging and authentic program to all of our students and also to truly challenge those that love science. Next slide, please. Our curriculum is aligned with the next generation science standards and focuses equally on 3 components. First, we have our 8 science and engineering practices, which are how we do science. In this case, sometimes kids design and conduct investigations or analyze and interpret data. We also have 7 cross-cutting concepts, which is how we think about science. So for example, in this case, across all of the disciplines, students might identify cause and effect or study systems. And finally, our core disciplinary ideas are what we know about science, our base content. Tonight, 3 teachers are going to share what each of these 3 components look like across grades 6, 7, and 8, and then I will share our advanced science program with you. Julie Trombetta is going to kick it off by sharing 2 of our 8 science and engineering practices and what they look like in 6th grade.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Trombetta. I teach 6th grade science at Western. The first science and engineering practice we'll look at is developing and using models. Real scientists do modeling all the time, which is why this is one of the key science and engineering practices. A model is an explanation of a real-world phenomenon, typically an answer to a question. Models represent student thinking in a way that makes sense to them. This could be a combination of drawings, annotations, arrows to show connections between concepts, revisions, and always additions of new learning. For example, in Unit 1 for 6th grade, students are asked to model how are our bodies able to move a kickball, which was an activity we actually did at the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. Students started with an initial version of their model to show their understanding at that point. Then as we got deeper into the curriculum, which focuses on the human body along with force and motion, they were able to come back to their model with a new color and add the information they've learned. In the first version of this student's model in the top right corner, you'll see the initial thinking in pencil. This is what the student thought the answer to the question, how are our bodies able to move a kickball, was at this point in time. We then talked about kinetic energy and potential energy, where you can see additions in red in the second version on the bottom left. You can even see they added a second kickball to represent kinetic energy once the ball's in motion. The third and final model on the bottom right came after learning about human body systems. This student added new learning in blue, stating that the brain and muscles control the internal and external motion and how it takes many body systems working together to make this happen. Every student does this 3 times throughout the unit, and they end with a full detailed explanation to the question. This science and engineering practice is exciting for kids because they not only do what real scientists do, but they get to see the development and progression of their learning right in front of them, which is awesome. Next slide, please. The next science and engineering practice we'll look at is designing solutions. In NGSS, students both pursue questions as scientists and solve problems as engineers. In this practice, students are acting as engineers to design a solution to a given real-world problem. They again love the idea that they're doing what real people do day to day. In Unit 2, they're exploring why we have different climates on our planet, and we're tasked with designing a solution for people living in extreme climates. They need to authentically and systematically follow the process an engineer would in order to solve the problem by first designing a prototype from what they've learned about climate and heat transfer, share with peers for feedback, make iterations to their piece of technology or product, and then improve their design. Students love collaborating, sharing their ideas with one another. They get so much out of giving and getting feedback. In the picture shown here, next slide, you'll see the blueprint version of the device turned into the physical prototype. It was exciting to see this come to life for them. This particular device was created to help people living in an extremely hot climate. This wearable umbrella was designed to shade people from the strong sun rays and cool them down with an internal fan. This process that engineers go through and that students are able to live through is rewarding and exciting. And today we actually talked about the Perseverance rover landing on Mars, and students asked, you know, what's going to happen if this doesn't work? And I said, well, what would you do if your solution doesn't work? And they said, well, we would probably go back and fix things and try it again. And I said, exactly. That's what real engineers and scientists do. So you're doing the same things that they do, which is really awesome to see and hear. Next up, we have Kate Brzezinski, who teaches 7th grade at Central Middle School. She will be explaining cross-cutting concepts.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you. I want to talk tonight about cross-cutting concepts. And like Julie said, I'm from Central Middle School teaching 7th grade science. Cross-cutting concepts are a way of linking different domains of science. I like to tell my kids that they're compared to themes in literature of a book. They seem to make that connection when I say that. Both of these themes in literature and the cross-cutting concept for the relationship to new scenarios. Knowing this helps the student make sense of new relationships. Some of these cross-cutting concepts include cause and effect, systems, and also size and scale. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about size and scale. It's a really important thing for scientists to be able to do is to make good observations. You need to be doing that in order to be a good scientist. So what I did last year is I had my kids, I gave them 2 different volcanoes. One was shaped like a very acute angle, very tall one. The other one was a lot more obtuse and flatter. And I asked my students to compare these 2 volcanoes. And they sketched volcanoes that were very similar, which was very interesting to me. So we had a conversation about size, scale, angles, all these different things that make the volcano different. After that conversation of size and scale, the students sketched the new sketch of the volcanoes, showing that they clearly were different shapes and sizes. And from that sketch and that observation, they were able to start making a really strong analysis and thinking about, okay, what might be happening inside the Earth to create these volcanoes to be so different. So these cross-cutting concepts, like I just talked about with size and scale, are extremely important. I'm going to pass it off next to Alex Hauer, who's speaking on the DCIs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Hauer. I'm an 8th grade science teacher at Western Middle School. And yes, I am going to talk to you today about the disciplinary core ideas in our curriculum and just give you a brief overview of what they look like in one of our 8th grade units. So the disciplinary core ideas, or DCIs, are pretty much the meat and potatoes of science class, or the backbone. It's the content of what students are learning. And what these are used for in our classes, they help the students to get information, observations, and ideas, which they will later use through the lenses of the CCCs or through some of the science and engineering practices to answer our unit driving questions that we have associated with each of our units in the NGSS curriculum. There are 4 domains of the DCIs that pretty much encompass all of the content that you would be familiar with in middle school science, like information about solar systems, about the human body, and they're sectioned off into the 4 domains of physical science, life science, earth and space science, and engineering technology, and the practice of science. Next slide, please. So what I have for you here is a smorgasbord of images which represent all of the disciplinary core ideas that you would see in our first unit in the 8th grade curriculum. And the title of that unit is Colossal Collisions. And in the unit, the students have to answer the question, what are the effects of an asteroid collision, and how could we prevent a future one from happening? So they start looking at content from the disciplinary core idea of Earth and space sciences, which you can see to the left there, the image of the stratigraphic layers and the graph of extinction rates over time. Students have to analyze information from resource card activities and collect information that they'll use later to answer the first half of our unit driving question, which is what are the effects of an asteroid collision? Then we do a big switch from the Earth and Space Sciences DCI into the physical sciences, and the students get to learn more about the general ideas of physics, the collisions of physics, and Newton's laws of motion. If you look at the GIF at the top of your screen here, you'll see that balloon moving across the screen, and that's one of the demos we have in class, which is fun. And then the students take their information that they gathered from that section of our unit and move on to the final part where they are constructing an EPD or an Earth protection device in a final lab that they kind of are trying to use to prevent an asteroid collision from hitting, or an asteroid from hitting Earth. And that's just a brief overview there for you. I'm going to pass it off to Jen Bresler now, who's going to talk about Alps science in middle school.
Thanks, Alex. So as you can see, all of our students are awarded a very meaningful science experience. And of course, we want to further challenge our gifted science students. This quote that was presented at an earlier board meeting really captures the spirit of our advanced science program. Next slide, please. In sixth grade science, all of our students explore how we use environmental and genetic factors to explain changes in organisms. They revise and refine models explaining what causes a local algal bloom in a lake as they're learning about weather and genetics. And by the end of the unit, they've identified the cause of the local toxic algal bloom. This is a common experience for all sixth grade science students. Our advanced students will then go on to engineer a solution for the toxic algal bloom. This will increase both the breadth and the depth of the science practices that we focus on. It's a complex issue, and kids will need to use real-world data and consult experts to be able to successfully design their solutions. Next slide, please. In the same unit, advanced science students may also be challenged with analyzing a data set of oxygen concentration in a pond using high school math standards. This is one of the data sets in our Tuva platform, and you can see that the students can manipulate the data in a variety of ways in order to answer their questions. Next slide, please. Our advanced science program is intentionally designed to meet the district goal of personalized learning. Students have meaningful choice as they tackle these complex and authentic challenges. They engage in them, as you heard, the same way that scientists and engineers do in the real world. They use a variety of skills, delve deeply into concepts, and ground their explanations and solutions with evidence. And of course, above all, we want our curriculum to inspire a love of science for all of our students. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present our middle school science curriculum tonight.
Thank you. All right, board members, questions, comments for our staff? Ms. Hirsch, I see your hand.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions, some of which I had already sent ahead to Mark, so I know I'll be waiting for some answers for later. But first off, I want to thank our wonderful educators and administrators for tonight's presentation and sharing your enthusiasm about science with us. It was a really nice overview of our science program, which I know was redesigned to align with the Ngss standards in 2019, I think. So I just sort of wanted to know, I would like a little bit more information really on what we're actually doing to support advanced science, both in the elementary and specifically at the middle schools. I know it's a question that the board's asked quite a few times. The curriculum was always supposed to, we've always been told it's been similar to that 6 and 6A, for instance, or are the same, but one goes a little deeper and a little quicker. But what are the other ways that we're sort of looking to support that advanced science classroom? As the last report that we had, said that most parents and students sort of didn't feel it was that much different than the traditional classroom.
Karen, I guess I'll take the first stab at that question, but then I'm going to probably defer to Sheila and to Jen Bresler. The thing that distinguishes 6 from 6A, based on what the teachers were sharing earlier tonight, it's really the level of rigor that students are exposed to, the depth and the breadth to the science concepts to which they're challenged, and then really utilizing multiple assessment techniques to verify and prove what their theories are. So it's, you know, the next generation science standards are robust enough that within our curriculum, it allows for that flexibility of all learners. So Jen or Sheila, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
One of the things that really sets an NGSS aligned curriculum apart from what we have done in the past is the complexity of the research and the design that we're asking students to do. In the past, we created data. This is real world data, things that other scientists and experts are working on. So we're exposing them to really high level data analysis and really coming up with design solutions or claims with evidence that have empirical support. And we're doing it to a much greater extent than we did in the past. And so this is much more challenging and much more comprehensive than anything we've done before.
Okay, and to sort of follow upon that, how are the students at the elementary schools tested and placed in the advanced science, as well as the same question is going to be, how are the students being placed in advanced science at the middle school level? I know the placement procedures were reviewed in the past few years. We've had a discussion about it during your Alp report, but the board had noted in years past, especially at middle schools, that a number of the students in advanced science, that oftentimes the number of advanced students in the advanced science courses at middle schools were greater than those in the on-level classes. So I was just wondering what we're sort of doing to place students at both levels to make them, you know, a little bit more stringent in the requirements.
We had a lot of discussions this year about the placement process. And one of the things we did is we elicited feedback from teachers, administrators, and parents in the community. And so one very different thing we're doing this year is we're asking for parental input at the beginning of the process. In recent years, we have discovered with conversations and meetings with parents, one-on-one meetings particularly, that we have a lot of students that are already going to STEM camps, that are engaging in courses and activities outside of school. So we are asking parents to provide us with information, more information about their student that we would probably not have an opportunity to know. So that and the teacher recommendation in the building advisory committee meeting is a large part of our discussion. Another thing that we're continuing to do is to talk about the students' cumulative year of work. And with the new curriculum, we have more project-based activities. We have much more design. We have, it's less about a multiple choice test than it is really about taking a look at the student's scientific reasoning over time. So that's another piece of it. And the third piece, which is a really critical component, is the science notebook, because that's where students are recording most of their work, and that's how they're communicating to us what they're thinking about and how their perceptions are changing as they gain new learning. So really we're, this year in placement, as we sit with the building advisory committee, we are talking holistically and comprehensively about each student. And we're continuing that data gathering process through the end of the academic year so that when they go to middle school, that we are assured that they're placed appropriately.
Is that the same procedure you're looking at elementary and then towards for placement in middle school then?
That would be for our placement for rising sixth graders from 5th to 6th.
Okay, because I mean, when we just had the report, you know, the Alp report update, that wasn't really, I mean, we talked about the building advisory committee, but there were still placements tests that the students were supposed to be taking. So, you know, if we're not going to be utilizing placement and we're only going to be utilizing parent and teacher input, as well as looking at cumulative work, I mean, please let us know, because that is a change from the past. I know those things were always looked at. It's really important to look at the full breadth of what a student is doing, which, so I agree with that. But, you know, if it is changing that we're not using the STAR as placement and other things, you know.
We are using the STAR. We really haven't dramatically, we've just added parent input. We haven't changed anything else in the placement process, but we've added parent input so that we can have that extra information. We do look at the STAR, but it's diminished because we really feel that the discussion with the teacher and also the student work and the science notebook is really important. And we also use the cumulative report card grades as well. So those things are in place and they don't represent changes, or I would have reported that out in the monitoring report. And we really typically haven't had a placement test for 5 to 6 science. We do for elementary science for ALP, and Bonnie can talk about that, but we haven't really done it in science because we have to be really careful with the testing that we're doing in mathematics that we're not over assessing students.
Okay, and then I guess the last question before I hand it over, I have a few more, but I'll just go with this one. The prior report, the curriculum plan review cycle and Curriculum Institute update that we got in September noted that Aspen was going to be identified as a tool to monitor and track student progress in the identified cross-cutting concepts in science and engineer practices, and that the science team, along with one of the middle school principals, was creating a plan for a pilot program this year to ensure that data was being consistently collected and shared with stakeholders across the to track students' learning, progression, and achievement across 3 dimensions of the NGSS. I didn't know if that pilot had begun, and if so, how it was going.
I'm going to defer to the middle school principals since they are just doing that pilot now.
Okay, so we are doing it. That was question 1. So if they may not have a response as to how it's going quite yet, but we are doing it, so that's good.
All right, Mr. Kelly.
I just wanted to compliment each of the presenters. I thought you guys did a great job. I loved the presentation. I think the energy was great. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Stowe.
I was going to say the same thing, Joe, but now that you took that away from me, no, but honestly, I love learning about, especially what my children are actually learning in school and seeing if I could do the project myself. So thank you so much for that. On the elementary piece, so I guess this will go to either Mark or Bonnie, the sort of changing to this 90-minute STEM and humanities block more permanently, like we've been doing this year. And I can say that I have 2 that are benefiting from it. So I see it personally, and I can see how it works very well for scheduling, having them home today because of the snow, and their teachers, their general ed teachers sending out how the block was going to go. You could see how they kind of seamlessly go in and out of the block. And so I could see a lot of advantage to that for the principals. Here's my question. Is it really true that you could potentially solve how I know historically the Alp elementary teachers have had to move from building to building? I know the parkways often shared people. With just 1.3 additions, you could sort of solve this moving between buildings across 11 elementary schools.
Kathleen, thank you for asking the question. The short answer is yes. We would utilize the existing staffing model that we have in place this year. And we gave you an estimated cost of what that entails, but there are certainly a number of benefits to evolving into the longer blocks of time. Certainly you did a great job explaining from a parent point of view. We had a parent earlier talk about the benefits as well. And certainly our educators can too. Just the consistency, the continuity of instruction, the ability to work interdisciplinary themes into a block of time, it's invaluable. And quite frankly, I don't know why we haven't asked for this sooner. And if this goes well, I will tell you now that my next year's ask is going to be to look at second grade Alp as a 5-day-a-week program rather than a 2-day-a-week program, because I really do think that, I'm new in my role. I'm going to question everything, and hopefully we can think differently about some things, and maybe we won't always agree. But I do think that there's opportunities here that we're learning about because we were faced with the COVID restrictions. And not everything is bad because of COVID. In fact, I think this is one of the good things that's coming out of it. So thank you for asking the question. I guess my last question back to the board would be, step 1 is taking the temperature of the board if this is something you want us to pursue. Step 2 then is for me to go back with Dr. Carabillo, Dr. Jones, Sean O'Keefe, and look and see where the money may be available in order to pull this off.
Yeah, so I think you probably saw where I was leaning, and I mean, obviously I have and we've also received positive emails from the community, and I've also heard from a bunch of people that are in the program. One of the things I specifically, as I hope I don't get any of the teachers in trouble here, but I like how if you have it in a block, I've heard that they are a little bit more flexible with doing maybe more math one day and more science the next day, just because they were really getting going on math. So then they didn't really have to switch, but they make sure that they get the allocation appropriately. And particularly, I always thought it was more logical to have reading and writing together. So I really like that. So I think you have my vote, but I know that it does come down to money. And this would add a benefit package unless you can find a way to sort of reallocate within what we have. This would be something that I would be very much in favor of, but that I'm just one. So thank you for explaining that, Mark.
Thank you, Kathleen.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I got a couple questions. First one is, I don't understand the math of 1.3 bodies and 340,000. Can somebody explain that?
I sure can.
Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, okay, Bonnie.
Do you want me to take it, Mark, or do you want to do it?
Whoever wants to explain it, I'll take the short, simple answer.
The short, simple answer, Peter, is the 1.3 is additional staffing we would need to secure. But the reason the cost is 340,000 is because we are elevating our 0.7 people to full-time status.
How many people would you elevate?
There's 11 buildings, so we have 11.7 staff members currently.
So,
No.
so you're saying, let me just repeat that, Mark. You're saying that in our 11 elementary school buildings, every single one of our ALP STEM teachers is part-time? That can't be right.
Well, Bonnie, do you want to talk about the specifics?
Yeah, I will, because I did all the,
Yeah.
in every
I mean, maybe
building,
it is right, but I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so in every building, you have a full-time teacher and a 0.7 teacher.
And what is the 0.7 teacher? It's always the math teacher?
It's whatever the scheduling, it could be the math, it could be, it could be a math or language arts.
How do you make that
They
decision?
share it.
Yeah.
That's a building level decision.
So Peter, that's traditionally negotiated between the two principals who are sharing that staff member.
Yeah, see, now I'm more confused because there's a different question for the building and then there's a different question for the district, right? I always understood that these were full-time employees that were covering more than one building. That's why I didn't understand when someone said they're part-time. I'm like, wait a minute. Now they may be part-time from the perspective of an individual building. Somebody, not here, but could somebody please put this all down on paper and follow up with the board? Because I don't understand how that number, what's in that number that gets to 340,000. And by the way, it sounds like a reasonable investment to me, but I'll make my second point, which is I would discourage the administration. Maybe some board members like it this way. Give me a rifle shot individual decision and I'll give you an opinion. But this is all in context. So increasing staff, super blocks, what it's covering, collapsing math and science together, you know, those may all be the right things to do, but they're in the context overall of the ALP program, which, you know, we had a review earlier. I think I asked at that point, Mark, a couple questions about, you really got to answer. What's the mission goal of ALP? You had an analysis that was done. There were 6 points, but you guys came in the last meeting and only talked about one of the 6. So I think I would be very supportive of an additional investment in ALP, but not supportive of that in isolation. I would need to understand the whole program, how it all fits together, instead of seeing it kind of piece by piece. So I realize, and I want to thank you guys, the people who presented tonight, great presentation, very helpful in getting specific and illuminating this. So it's not in edu-speak, it's in something that's easy for everybody to digest. To your point, I think if the board wants to bring this up, I would hope the board does. I said it at the last meeting. Talking about ALP and the educational program and these kinds of governance decisions is what the board should be doing. The board tends to like to do other stuff, because this works a little harder. But I think this is what we need to be doing more of. So I applaud and I agree. I would hope the board would spend more time on this subject in the coming months to get to a place where decisions could be made that could be reflected in the budget that's built for the following year. And then maybe if we want to do that on an interim. I wanted to go back, and I'll leave it there. I wanted to go back on a couple other things that I didn't understand. And they're just in random order. The Alp English program and the Alp math program in the elementary schools. Lately, this thing has crept in where we kind of talk about elementary and middle school together as an advanced learning program. That's totally new. Not a bad idea, but we've never really talked about it that way. I think it adds some confusion. And here's why, and I'd like clarification, Mark. In the Alp programs for English and math, and I don't know if it's true for science, I think it's not. The program in elementary is acceleration, meaning if you're in the program, your curriculum content is grade levels ahead. I believe at the middle school, particularly in science, that's not true. So 6, 7, and 8, if I'm not wrong, and I appreciate it if somebody covered it, everybody's taking the same grade level. The difference is that is the depth and rigor. Is that correct? Because those are like two completely different educational programs, educational philosophies. And, I've talked a couple times about the speed bump that happens for students and parents as they go from elementary grade 5 to the middle school at 6. But can you just confirm that elementary is acceleration and the middle school is depth and rigor?
Yeah, in short, yes, Peter. And
Okay.
the thing to think about with middle school is this, we're preparing our middle school students for
To high
what
school.
they're going to have options for in high school.
Correct.
In particular, the way we run the honors program.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense to me because you eventually have to make that transition so kids are prepared. And but I just wanted to confirm that. Is Alp science in elementary school accelerated, or it's not like math and English? It's actually on grade level content, but deeper like the high school, like the middle school.
As it stands right now, yes.
Do you want to keep it that way?
I have a lot of thoughts about changing a lot of things. That's one of the things that I would like to talk further about with the advisory group that Bonnie's putting together. Okay.
And my last question was, and I'm sorry, I apologize to which one of you as the teachers who were brilliant presenters tonight. Which one said this, but maybe somebody can figure out who said it. You talked about personalized learning and authentic choices for kids. That wasn't clear to me. Can someone explain what they meant? Because I don't think that's what the board means by personalized learning. But maybe someone can clarify that. I don't know which teacher presented.
I think that was me. Jeff.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Yes, so the point is that when we're giving the kids these very authentic challenges, for example, they need to design a solution or, gather enough information to present an argument, they have choice within doing that. So they're able to tie in the things that they're possibly interested in or their skills that they're capable of. They're able to play to their strengths, so to say, because the tasks are open-ended, then they therefore can choose.
Can you give me an example to make that? I understand what you just said.
So for example, one of my favorite units is the one that Julie spoke about on where the kids are designing solutions for people that live in extreme climates. And just to walk into the classroom on the day that kids are presenting, you see such an incredible variety of projects. No two are even close to the same because kids just were able to go in so many different, different ways, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, no, that
sorry
does.
to making it impactful for individual students.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, Miss Downey.
I'm just going to follow up to what Peter and Kathleen were just saying about the elementary school block. And I echo Peter's request that we understand the economics of the potential change in staffing, which, in terms of helping you make with a decision. I just had one quick question about the middle school. I know we talk about like the placement process into 6th grade, but is there movement in the middle school of kids into advanced science, out of advanced science? How is that process done?
Christina, thanks for the question. And I see Tom Healy nodding. So Tom, do you want to take that one?
Why did I nod? No, just kidding. Yeah, so science, just like any of our other middle school courses, we are constantly reevaluating students' progress in all their areas. That's really conversations with the teachers, with the guidance counselors, with the administrators, that interdisciplinary team. And ultimately our philosophy is always to ensure that students are being challenged to the level that they're most ready for. So we're always looking to push kids up. And so, when we're looking at year over year in the middle school, the science teachers know the depth and the rigor of that advanced curriculum, and they're always looking to see if there's a certain child that's maturing at a certain point or showing a level of interest, and we're looking to push them up. So it's really based on the curricular data, the assessment data that we have inside the classroom day to day, and those conversations that are ongoing to make sure students are ready for that next challenge.
Right, so it's nice that they're not locked into a path from day one.
Absolutely not. We're constantly fluid and always looking to challenge.
Thank you.
And that's done across the 3 middle schools, Christina.
Excellent, thank you.
Ms. Olson.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I definitely see the value. I can see the value in long blocks, from the student learning perspective and from the educator's perspective, being able to, having that sort of flexibility and, when something's really working, to stick with it and let those students really grapple with one concept, and then maybe have less time with a different subject that particular day. I think that's a phenomenal model. That being said, I definitely, as you may already know, don't agree with the idea of, I think you said up to 5 days a week, starting in early as 2nd grade. I have, I've done a fair amount of research on the negative consequences of starting to track students so young, and having a 5 days a week with those long block schedules does ultimately create a school within a school. And you do start accelerating those students at such a younger age that they are, to a certain degree, and I appreciate Tom Healy and that saying that they can fluidly move in and out, and they can, but they're also sort of, generally speaking, sort of on a track to move at a certain pace. So I would not be in supportive of adding more money into this program, because I don't fundamentally agree with the program. But that being said, I do think that long blocks are something to explore. So that's where I am on it.
Thank you. It's Peter Bernstein. Sorry, we have to identify ourselves for the video. I actually like the idea of long blocks and sort of the interdisciplinary nature of it for both the ALP program and quite frankly, I think, for every student, I think it really works in a whole lot of ways. And students that maybe aren't strong in math may be more interested when it's combined with something else. So just one of those things. In terms of the staffing model, I guess we would need a whole lot more clarity. But I'll just remind everybody where we are. Our budget's been voted on and submitted to the BET. It's under consideration. So, it's not like we're going to have the ability to go and add anything to it. To the extent that we can repurpose what we have in that budget, that's something that we certainly can explore. But we are not at a place where adding staff makes a whole lot of sense to a whole lot of people in the town. We have things we'd like to do, like social workers, which we just don't have the funding for. So we have to figure out how to resource things appropriately. And this is when I'd like to see resourced. I don't see how we can do that without reallocating from somewhere else. I guess I also do want to point out, you talked a little bit about the shift in the identification of students for science from elementary to middle. We've been hearing from parents now that there's a shift in the way we're doing the identification for English. So we heard from you not very long ago, Bonnie and Mark, how we were doing it. And now we're hearing COGAT's going away and there's other changes. So I guess, I think the board probably should hear more from you. It doesn't have to be now, but on those changes, when they were made, what the thinking behind that was, that would be helpful for us. And just making sure there's better communication, both to us and to the parents. Because I know there are a lot of people, concerned about placement. The elementary kids are going through it right now for middle school about course selection. The middle school kids are going through it for high school, and there's a lot that rides on those things. So we just want to make sure there's better communication there.
Peter, do you mind if I respond quickly now?
Given that it's not really germane to the agenda topic, I'd rather we not take it up right now, Mark. But I do want to hear from you, certainly. And I know the parents want to hear from you guys. So with that, I'm not seeing any other hands. So I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the next item. I want to thank the teachers very much. At least one of them I know very well. And I know the work that goes on in her classroom is absolutely amazing. So thank you all. And Mr. D'Amico, you can stay right there because the next item is the Linkit update.
Thank you, Chairman Bernstein. Linkit is certainly a topic that a lot of people are interested in. We have several people presenting tonight. Jennifer Lau, Research Manager. And from a principal perspective, we have Ali Michelson from New Lebanon School and Jennifer Bensavango from Old Greenwich School. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of the program and what we're presenting tonight, I do want to say that it was intentional that the data that's going to be shared tonight was preliminary data, simply because we were still within the testing window when it was time to publish the report to the board. So we look forward to in March giving you much more detailed data on the Linkit results from the winter benchmark assessment. So with that, Jen, I'll turn it to you.
I don't believe she's connected. Let me actually unmute her.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. Got it. Yes. Sorry. All right. Next slide, please. We're going to, Mark's entire presentation covers 3 topics. I'm going to be speaking briefly on the parent portal launch. Then Mark will be discussing how our remote students doing with the preliminary winter benchmark data. I'm actually going to be coming back in and giving you a mini update on developments on how we're deploying Linkit. And then we will transition to Ali and Jen as they give more specific examples about how the schools are using the benchmark data. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so this will be very fast. What I'm going to do is simply preview what parents will see when they log on to the Linkit parent portal. We'll have to think of exactly what we're going to call it. But you can see that there is a Google SSO. So for parents who have a Google account, they won't have to remember a username and password. We all love Google SSO. And this is just the welcome screen where they will log in. That's just the Linkit homepage. Next slide, please, Mike. When they go in, oh, sorry, very important point I should have made with the last slide is that this is all of the exact same data that they had in the prior platform. It's just been ported over to a new platform. So there's no dropping of data in there. We have 5 years of data, and actually we think this is a cleaner way to get into it. So now we can go to the next slide. So when a parent enters a student account, they will see all of these menus, and the data can be organized either by subject. since we're going to have all of the test data in addition to attendance data, all of their grades, SBA scores, but this obviously family consumer science relates to their grades. But if they were to click into language arts, which I'll show you later, you would see all of the information related to language arts. The parent also has the option of organizing the data differently. Next slide. They can organize it by year. And this type of organization options are also that which any of our teachers have. They can also have the ability to look at a student record in these multiple ways. And then the next slide, Mike, is they can organize by data type. So here you can see a subset of the things that we have loaded in: attendance, grades, NGSS, PSAT, SAT, STAR, SBA, etc. So what a parent does is they would click on any one of these specific bars, and next slide. They would see a list of the entries for each of those areas. So here you can see I've taken a snapshot of what would be available for this particular student for language arts. And you can see that there's STAR. They're going back a few years. You see SBA growth, you see SBA. On the left-hand side, what I'd like you to see is that there is a list of entries for the students. So in this case, I have 3 children. A parent logs in and they would click on each of those children in order to see their various records. Next slide. Once there was a parent gets in, they can then select an item to drill in to get additional data. And here you can see if they had selected the STAR, they would be able to see the level that was associated, the scaled score, the percentile, and the associated Lexile level. So they can drill in. This is what you would see on SBA, and the next, I'm sorry, STAR, and then the next slide is what they would be able to see on SBA. So you can see the overall level, and then you will be able to see the subscores, because as you may recall, the SBA is there's an overall composite number, and then there are 3 subscores. Next slide. So in the initial rollout, which was going to be fairly soon, but as Mark alluded to, we've had an extension of the STAR window because of a convergence of quarantines and snow. The first phase will have all of the same data that we had in the prior portal ported over. And then in phase 2, we're going to have the benchmark detail released. And here you can see a sample report where it reads grade 4 math form A. So form A is the fall administration of the benchmark. And you can see that there are options to see each of the standards. So for my individual students, this is how I performed. And the standards, parents do not speak 4.nbt.A2. That's meaningless. But what you can see on the right side of the slide is just as you hover over each of those standards, you get a description of what the specific standard is. And what we're going to do is when we release this information out, we will be giving parents links so that they can get additional information about what each of these standards represents, both at a state level and in Common Core. And I think that concludes my introduction to what parents will be seeing in their parent portal in Lincoln. Mark?
Thanks, Jen. If there's one question I'm asked quite often, it's how are our remote learners doing by way of comparison to the students in our brick and mortar locations. So I thought it would be helpful, even though again, this is preliminary data, that I share with you how our remote learners are doing. So if you look at the bar graphs, you'll see that the Greenwich Remote Learning School is in green. The district average is black. And then we have all of our schools fleshed out in navy blue. The red through line is to bring your attention to the fact that, and this is a question I'm asked quite a bit too, in terms of the benchmark assessment, It's important to understand the philosophy of the assessment, which is given throughout the year. It's utilized for progress monitoring of standards that are ascertained by students as they're exposed to that curriculum. So it's not unusual at the beginning of the year for a student to not score very highly because they haven't been exposed to the instruction of these standards. But by the winter benchmark, in theory, our assumption should be that at least 50% of those standards have been covered and that students are tracking in the direction of 100% exposure and mastery by the end of the year. So I think that's an important distinction to make. But again, this is preliminary data. I know the board would like to see much more drill down information. And I think once the dust settles on our assessment window, we can certainly provide that in March. So these two slides, this one is the math performance. And then Mike, if you could switch, this is our ELA performance. Overall, what does this tell me? It tells me that we're doing quite well. So whereas at the beginning of the year, people were very concerned about what type of learning loss there might be because of the disruption in instruction in the spring. Again, this is one data point, but what this one data point suggests is that we're doing quite well. Next slide.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just can we go back to that slide real fast? And I know
Sure,
this
Karen.
is I'm sorry, I don't understand the red line concept. And before we jump to something else, since we're talking about it, can you explain to me how we're doing very well? Because I don't understand how this bar graph is supposed to provide that information.
Sure. So think of it this way. At the end of the year, the expectation is when the students complete the spring benchmark, that they will have been exposed to all of the standards that are on that benchmark assessment, thus scoring, we hope, 100%. By mid-year, the assumption is you've been halfway through your curriculum, your prescribed curriculum. So students, when they're exposed to standards they've been taught, they should score well on those standards. Is that helpful?
Yes, so that suggests that, for example, and it's small on this one, but if I look at some of the students in some of the schools have not yet met the benchmark, is what you're saying. So if I look at, what is it, JC, for example, and I can't read the next one, my age or my eyes, I can't see it. You're saying that of the tests in Form B, so this was just the most recent testing, those students in the 4th grade class there had not met the benchmark.
Now, that very well may be the case, again, once the window is closed and all of the data is analyzed, or it may not be the case. It could be that those numbers go up. I can't give you a definitive answer, Karen, on that just yet, because we need to crunch those numbers once the window closes.
Okay, so when will you have updated data?
Well, I believe that according to the board agenda plan, the hopes is that we will be back in front of you in March with that information.
Okay. Apologize for the interruption, but we were on the slide and I didn't understand how to read it, so I appreciate that.
No, thank you for asking. Appreciate it. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Bencivango at this point, who's going to talk. Oh, sorry, Jen.
Yep, it's okay. I'm going to lower my hand. Yes, at this point, what we'd like to do is share with you a 4-minute video of how schools, the district, can compare Form A and Form B and what additional analytics are possible. Remember that Linkit is really 3 separate modules. There's the data warehouse capacity, there is the analytic capacity, and then there is the assessment platform itself. So I'm going to play a 4-minute video to show you kind of how we're stepping through in terms of deploying the product. I'm going to share my screen. Mike, can you talk me through this? I'm going to hit share screen.
Hit share screen. Make sure that you hit
Share sound.
Share sound. Yes.
Okay. All right. Video is to illustrate what a school can do now that we have Form A and Form B completed, and we're using an anonymized version of North Miami School. I've already brought us into 3rd grade math as an example, and I've got Form B, which was administered in the winter, and Form A that was administered in the fall. Actually, let me switch those around. So you can see a general distribution of the scores. Remember, these are end of year standards, so students are seeing material that they haven't been given explicit instruction on. Doesn't mean they don't know it already, it just means that we've got end of year standards. And you can see between the fall and the winter that there has been a distinct shift to the right in terms of the scores, which is a positive sign. We have the usual abilities for each of these, which I can do class diagnostic, and I can choose a class. We'll take Klein, and I can see where we are on the standards. I can also click on one and say, well, 77% is great, but in fact, I've got one student who really wasn't, didn't quite master this material. I should probably go back with them. I'm guessing these standards haven't been taught, and they're fractions, so of course, yes. So that's one terrific, that's one of my favorites. You can also do a grouping report where we say, I'd like to group the students based on standards, these 3 standards or all of the standards. How do I look? And I've got one group, which is all red and orange, and I've got a nice solid group down here. So now I can start deciding what I want to do in terms of instruction. Let's think about whether those were standards I needed to move forward. But what is really interesting now is that I can compare Form A and Form B and start looking at individual students. So I click Student Results, and what I get is a direct comparison for each child, and I can see how each individual child has advanced or not advanced. In this case, I've gone from 50 to 67. In this case, I've gone from 37 to 73. Here, I've gone from 73 to 67. So you've got, a way to be able to gauge individual. I can also generate this report, which says, how is this class doing in aggregate between Form A and Form B? This is great. I had direct instruction on this. 83% is terrific. I wonder how the rest of, where's my outlier? These we've already established. Fractions weren't taught, so that makes sense. Or if I still had an average score of 50%. So students are not completely unfamiliar with this, and I can use that as a foundation to move forward. There's also a graph. I can also see this same information on a student by student level. And the last thing that we wanted to share with you is that we can create cross-school visibility. So the secondary schools can look at the profile of their rising students before they actually arrive. So here's an example of Central Middle School, and we'll say Tom Healy, but there are several people with access to this. And Tom has a group of the rising 6th graders, as well as last year. You can see the same group was created, rising 6th graders for last year. And all of the data associated with the students at his feeder schools is available to not just Tom, but his SDT as well as his guidance counselors. We're very excited about that as a way for the secondary schools to get a sense of their overall incoming class and what might be the best way to schedule to meet their collective needs. And finally, we've begun exploring the assessment platform component of Linkit, where we can build our own custom assessments and leverage the analytic capacities on our own instruments. So thank you. That was a very speedy drive-through on, let me stop sharing, new capacities we have with Linkit. And with that, I will turn this over to Jen Ben and Ali Bartholomew.
Just before Jen, you take over, I just want to clarify that that's all anonymous data that we're presenting.
Yes. All anonymous.
Okay, Jen.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Good evening, Board of Education members, Dr. Jones, and members of our community joining us tonight. My name is Allie Michelson, and I'm the proud principal at New Lebanon School. Ms. Benzavango?
And I am Jen Benzavango, the proud principal of Old Greenwich School, built in 1902, right behind me.
And we're built in 2017-18. Thank you for providing us with the opportunity to share with you how we are using Linkit as an instructional tool in our buildings. Tonight, we will discuss the purpose of Linkit, the teams who use Linkit in our building, how we analyze data, when we meet, what this looks like in practice, lessons we've learned, principal collaboration, and next steps. That was on the previous slide. And then the purpose of our meeting this evening is to share with you how we're using Linkit to analyze student data to inform our instruction in the buildings. Ms. Benzavango?
Great. So we pull together instructional teams, and those teams include our literacy and math specialists, building administrators, our Linkit super users, grade level teachers, special educators, Alp teachers, ELL teachers, anyone who's really touching the core academics with kids, to make sure that they have an opportunity to look at this data, look at how we're analyzing it, both from a tier 1 and a tier 2 perspective. And next slide, please. So that, the question becomes, when do we do this and how do we do it? And we're actually in the process of doing it right now. So we have the opportunity to pull together grade levels with our Linkit super users and the committee that we talked about, and meet for sometimes half a day to go through and really analyze and drill down the data. We haven't had the opportunity to get into question by question analysis, seeing how our students answer each individual question on an assessment, really since the CMT. It's been a long time since we've been able to do that. And this tool provides us that opportunity. So we can go in and look very specifically at how each child is answering a particular question. We can, at that point, get a good idea of, is this content area that we are struggling with, or is it, they haven't fully read the question and didn't realize that they needed to select 2 answers instead of 1. And sometimes when we use STAR or some of our other vehicles for assessment, we don't have that question by question analysis for each of our students, whereas this tool allows us to do that. It also, as Jen just shared, gives us the ability to analyze by standard, by skill, and we're really drilling down with teachers to identify whole group instruction, small group instruction, and what those next steps are after each assessment window, both for reading and for math. Next slide, please. So we do this after every and this really varies in every building. Allie and I both do this right after every Linkit benchmark administration. And we do it for up to a half day. In some instances, the first round in my building, for example, we used a half day. This round, we spent about an hour and a half with each grade level, but it was enough time to really dive into the data and then send the teachers off to determine next steps for their individual classes and sometimes for the class as a whole. And next slide. Allie?
Thank you. Now we would like to speak to you about what this looks like in practice and how we are able to use Linkit as an instructional tool to improve student outcomes. Next slide, please. 2 examples I will provide this evening focus on whole class instruction and small group goals. What you see here is an example of how we drill down to the Common Core standard or skill level where students may be struggling, which Linkit allows us to do. And then we develop instructional strategies that align to those standards or skills. This step allows teachers not just to see and interpret data, but to actually plan for future instruction based on what the data is telling us. Here you see examples of reading and math standards where a majority of the class struggled and instructional strategies aligned to those standards for teachers to implement. Next slide, please. Here you see an example of a SMART goal the team developed for a small group of students who struggled with showing numbers to the hundreds in different ways. SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, and timely, and it is the gold standard of goal writing in education. Not only did the team write a goal, but they brainstormed types of questions teachers could ask students to check for the actual understanding of that skill. Next slide, please. Ms. Bensavengo.
So when we looked at the lessons learned, and this varies obviously for every homeroom, for grade levels, we really were able to take a look and say, in some respect, is it the vocabulary that we're using on a daily basis with kids and what we're looking for in the questions that we're asking? Do we need to incorporate a different level of math vocabulary, for example, in the classroom, because the language that was used on the test wasn't necessarily consistent with what was happening in the classroom itself? Or in the reading questions, when we were diving deeper into them, were the kids understanding what the nuances were that that they were looking for as far as answers? Or did we need to dive deeper and do more close reading examples? And so when we do that analysis and we are looking at it holistically with the grade level and our literacy and math specialists, we're really diving into that data to make a decision about where are we in the curriculum? Are these questions that we haven't yet touched? Have we touched it, and did one class perhaps get it at a different level than another? How is that teacher teaching it? If another group of students seem to struggle, do we have a consistent problem in a particular area across the grade level that we need to go back and do a reteach? Do we need to really think about how we're using some of our alternate times in the day? So like the what I need now block, that wind block of our day, where we can go in and provide enrichment and reinforcement for some of our students. Do we need to revisit some of the work then and go back and do some reteaching? Or are we at a point where our kids have a particular skill and they're going into this assessment already having it, and we perhaps haven't even, touched on it quite deeply? And are we able to extend that at that point? Next slide. And one more.
Now we're going to share, that's okay, go ahead. Now we're going to share with you what this looks like as a collaborative principal team who oversees the 11 elementary schools. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Mr. D'Amico has implemented a principal team structure with lead principals who meet regularly in smaller groups of 3 to 4 principals. This structure allows us to collaborate on a more regular basis and share out best practices that are happening in our buildings. In addition, all of our math interventionists are split between 2 buildings, allowing for additional collaboration across schools. Next slide, please.
And our next steps are simply to continue to analyze this data. So we're in the process of meeting right now with teams as the final benchmark B data is coming in. We're looking at trends that we see, but it also helps us as we're looking at things for next year. So if we see a common trend where a particular lesson or unit was an area of concern across a grade level, then as we're planning and thinking about next year's curriculum, we're already starting to talk about how we need to modify the instruction next year to dive deeper into a particular area so that we can continue to grow both in our day-to-day and then in our long-term as we tweak our practice. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Any questions for anyone who presented on the Link It tonight?
All right, thank you, Mr. D'Amico, and our principals of our newest and oldest schools. Nice bookends there. Mr. Scher.
Thanks for the update. When you say Form A, Form B, you mean tests, right?
Yeah, the administration.
Right, the administration of the test. Okay.
Correct.
And then Mark, these are the people who are taking Link It. You're talking about them taking the test that's in Link It, right?
It's the test that Link It created themselves. Yes, it's their canned version of a grade level standard assessment.
Okay, because that's what I wanted to ask about. The last time we talked about this, it was presented as these tests were developed by us in these, and they were being loaded in.
So Peter,
But
let me.
I think I heard somebody say, these are tests that are coming from Linkit for the testing of the standard. I just got a little confused, and maybe you could clarify that.
Yeah, and it can get very confusing very quickly. So to clarify, the benchmark assessments are the assessments created by the Linkit group. That said, Linkit is a robust platform, and it allows us to upload our internal assessments so that they can be warehoused. We hope that that's the direction that we move into or grow into as we become more facile with the Linkit platform, Peter.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, but okay. I mean, the struggle with this is that I was not comfortable with Linkit is because I asked Jen Lau this question in prior meetings, is they're a new company, they're a small company. The critical part is using assessments because you guys have decided to be, 100% aligned to Common Core standards at a particular grade level. There's a whole bunch of problems associated with that, but I want to put that on the side. Let's just take it as it is. You've said, I'm assessing that standard, specifically competency in this particular grade at this particular moment, 100% alignment to essentially the Common Core, which is Connecticut standards. It's not Greenwich, in some cases, it's not Greenwich's standard. So, but I think I'm going down that track where you're saying, Mark, we've given early assessment, which you would call Form A, I guess, which is where does the kid stand when they come into the district, come into the grade. Then you're doing B, which is the second administration of testing, and that's done when? January?
Correct. January.
And then it said in there 3 or 4. Is it 3 or there's 4?
So there's 3, but this year, Peter, but this year I want to be clear on this. We did add a 4th, and that was the one that we gave at the very beginning of the school year, and it assessed last year's standards so that teachers had some data point to act.
It was an ad hoc.
Yes, correct.
But you're saying normally there will be 3, just like STAR. So are we doing Linkit and STAR? We're doing Linkit and STAR, right?
Currently, yes.
Okay. So, and then my question was, Mark, you're saying that the second administration is not complete, so you don't have all the data yet? Is that what Jen was saying?
Yeah, I mean, we were hoping
for whatever reason it's not complete.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And then what is the benchmark standard?
Tell me a little bit more about what you're asking.
Okay, so if I go and I administer, if I go in and I look at whatever the particular standard is, fractions or numbers up to 100 or in 10 base or whatever that particular standard is, right? You're assessing for it in a particular grade. You're assessing for mastery, right? But there has to be some, it's not mastery, and maybe it is. Mastery is 100% of the questions were answered correctly. There's some standard level that you set that determined mastery of that standard, meaning I gave them an assessment and they got a score of 70% of the questions correctly. I mean, that's a simple form, but it's typically done in a little bit more sophisticated way, particularly with an automated system like this. But my question is, what is our standard of mastery? What is our performance standard that indicates mastery?
Well, the expectation, Peter, is that we're at 100% by the end of the year. But in terms of,
well, Mark, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt because I'm realizing I'm taking you not in the right track. Away in the olden days, probably when you and I, a passing grade, which would have been mastery, would have been a C. That's 70%. You're demonstrating that of the content that is being assessed, you can properly demonstrate that you know 70% of it. That was in the olden days a mastery standard. What I'm trying to understand here is I get you want to teach 100% of the strands, but in each strand, what is the standard by which we have declared that a student has achieved mastery?
So I don't know if it's possible to pull up one of Jen's slides where it shows the color bands with the different percent correct.
Yes.
That's what I would point to, Peter. But
okay,
in
I'm
terms
with
of
you.
us, in terms of us,
what
go
is
ahead.
that standard for us that makes the thing, I guess, green?
Jen, do you have that information?
Yes, I think the important distinction is that we're using this as an instructional planning tool, and it's really not evaluative of the student. But to your point, there are
that doesn't make any sense.
Lincoln's history, and they have over 10 years of administering these exams and aligning with Common Core, is that if a student has approximately 75%, that they would be able to pass the Common Core exam. So here, where you've got, we're at the 50% mark. If we were to move in an aggregate, you get to 75%.
Yeah,
now,
Jen,
does that represent 75% on every standard, or is that 100% of the 75% of the standards? This is all information that we're going to tease out once we actually get SBA results.
Jen, I think, hold on, you're jumping a little too fast. Can you please go to the one where you have a student example and you did, or maybe that was in your video?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that I understand the SBA. The SBA in grade 3, there are 20 Common Core standards. The SBA will assess a student on all 20. That's what the SBA will do. Okay, it doesn't go standard by standard. It has a series of questions it answers, and it'll give a comprehensive view of a kid after they have been taught all 20 standards. I get that part. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is you guys have connected to, in order for a kid to perform well on the SBA, which is our definition of mastery, okay, they have to learn all 20 standards. Because if I don't teach them all 20 standards, they're going to get a test and there's going to be a gap in their learning to what they're assessed. So my question is, and I understand what you guys are doing, you're going along with a teacher during the year and saying, number 1 of 20, I have to be sure the kid nails that. And I've determined in the district what level they have to hit so that I determined in the district they mastered standard number 1 and standard number 2 and standard number 3 and standard number 4. And I understand that that all builds to the end, which is if a kid gets some percentage correct, on each standard, I've determined they've mastered that standard. And a kid who's mastered all 20 standards is going to have 20 greens in our charts. So my question is, what is your performance level that you're applying to each standard that you mark the thing green, which tells a teacher the student has reached the mastery level for this standard? Obviously, if they're not at mastery, they're either yellow or red.
Yeah, Peter, I think if we could pull up the.
So I'm just wondering what that level is. Is it 75%?
You just wanted to know the number that distinguishes the 3 colors?
Yeah, we have that.
I'm only interested in what number triggers green.
80%.
80% is your state. So they have to get an 80% score in the Ngss assessment for that standard to get the thing to go green.
Correct.
Okay. And then let me say this way. If a student is then at 80% green in all standards for that grade level, you would expect them to get a mastery score, even if it's at the lowest level. I think that's level 3. in SBAC, you would expect a kid who has that would then be able to perform at grade level, if you will, on the SBAC. They may or they may not, but that would be your expectation, correct?
I'm following your logic. My hesitancy in saying correct is the Lincoln has to prove itself to me that it does.
Yeah.
Have
It
that
hasn't
strong
done that yet.
correlation.
The theory is that's how it would work.
Yes, the theory is correct.
And your standard is 80%. You answered the question. Thanks. I totally
Right.
understand it. I totally see the value of this as an instructional tool. It's great for teachers because it breaks it down to a strand level. Super great as an instructional tool. I'm
Peter,
trying to think about it.
We've got a couple of other people with their hands up. Can we turn to them and we can come back to you if you still have questions?
I don't have any other questions. I think, Peter, when we come to the next meeting, we need to understand how this rolls up to the strategic measures and all the other measures of the board. And I think
it's on our agenda for I think it's March 11th. It's a retreat, so they'll have the data for us and we can dig in then. All right, Ms. Hirsch.
Sorry.
You may want to turn your microphone off, Mr. Scher, when you ramble on about people. Thank you. Ms. Hirsch.
So I know that you briefly mentioned, Mr. Scher asked one of my questions about if the Lincoln's assessments are also being given as well as the STAR, and I know you said that they are. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. Being that the STAR has always been noted as being, given 3 times a year for students, possibly 4, and these Lincoln testing dates weren't listed in our assessment schedule that was given to us in September. I'm wondering how that ties in with the timing for the STAR tests. And I know that when we were originally given the Lincoln assessment overview in I think it was June of last year, you guys noted that it was a formative assessment process being given prior to and the end of a unit based on curriculum pacing. So just sort of wondering how that ends up equating to 3 to 4 times a year, or if that's how we're going to be moving forward with Lincoln.
So Karen, let me take the first thing that you said and make sure that I'm clear on this, because perhaps it needs to be refined on the assessment calendar. It is absolutely on the assessment calendar, but it's labeled as GPS benchmark because that's what Lincoln is not a test. It's just the company that created the test. It's the GPS benchmark administrations A, B, and C. Is that helpful with regards to your first question?
I can go back and take a quick look, but I know it was noted as being Lincoln, but it didn't actually have the testing window on there when we saw it. I feel like it was in October, but I can go back and look.
Okay, and then can you give me the second one again?
So, because originally when we were given the presentation on Lincoln, it was noted that these assessments were going to be used in the formative assessment project prior to starting a unit or at the end of a unit based on curriculum pacing. As opposed to being like a 3 to 4 times a year, just like STAR is. So I was just wondering if that has changed how we're utilizing Lincoln assessments, or if this is just the start of it and we'll be moving it forward and using it in other ways.
Well, Karen, to be honest, I think we're evolving in our thinking of how we're going to use Lincoln in its entirety. It's a very robust platform. It does afford us lots of opportunities to, again, customize assessments based on when we actually expose students to particular standards. So one of the things that I'm already thinking about, and Dr. Jones and I talked about, and Jen Lau as well, is, maybe our thinking will change in that instead of giving the benchmark that's created by Lincoln, maybe it's better if down the road we create the assessments ourselves, so that at the end of the first marking period, you give one and it assesses specifically the curriculum that the teachers taught during the first marking period. And then it could be truly used as a progress monitoring tool. Is that helpful?
So would that replace STAR then at some point if you're looking to use it as that type of benchmarking? I'm just trying to see.
No, because STAR is a universal screen. It's not comparing apples to apples.
And then the other question, I know I had asked this and you might not have the answer yet, but we were only shown results from grades 2 to 5. And I know originally we were told this is also going to be given it to the middle schoolers. Has it been given to them yet?
Yeah, Dr. Carabell, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but I can confirm that the middle schools did do the Linkit assessment, and I imagine we will share that data out, correct, Dr. Carabello, in March as well?
I'm muted. Am I still muted?
No, we can hear you, Ann. Now you're muted.
Now we can't.
Now you're muted.
The middle schools have only given Linkit once. They gave only one assessment so far.
Okay.
When they give all of them, then we will be able to report out on that.
And so when we get those more updated reports, will we also getting the STAR reports that we can compare? I just want to make sure that, you know, that the results from both are showing that we're moving forward, because this report showed with the Linkit data, at least in the winter, that it looked like we are hitting our benchmarks, which is great, even amongst, you know, without the COVID slide. So I just wanted to see if they aligned with the results we were seeing from STAR.
Yes, we had hoped to close the STAR window on Friday, but because of the weather, we have groups of students that can't take the test right now. And I'm not a real big fan of giving the STAR remotely. So we're kind of hoping the weather improves and that we have students in school. That's up to Dr. Jones tomorrow, and we can actually close out the window. If not, it's going to have to push back into next week, Karen.
Okay, no, so I'm sorry, I didn't need to interrupt.
We also wouldn't compare both of them. They're two different information assessments. So we can look and see how our students are progressing with STAR on the universal benchmark. And then we can look at the Linkit results and see how they're doing. And depending on those particular standards that we want them to be successful with by the end of the year.
No, I knew that they were testing for different things, but if we're seeing growth on both sets of tests, then it shows that we're doing something right, that we're not having the COVID slide. So I was just looking to see overall, not in the specifics, to see if we're moving forward in both ways, to make sure that our students are accessing learning, whether they're physically in school or at home or in a hybrid manner, that they're able to access their academics and their education in the way that's being intended. So thank you for that, and I will pass the mic to the next.
Great, thank you. Ms. Olson.
Thank you both for that. First of all, thank you, Mark, for including the Remote Learning Academy. And it is great to see, you know, that we are hitting those benchmarks, or at this point, you know, that as was stated, that we are, as a district, generally doing all right based on all things considered. So that's good news. When the middle school results come out, do you know if we'll be able to separate remote learning? I know that middle schools doesn't technically have a remote learning academy. They just sort of push into the classroom. But do you know if we're able to see how remote learners are doing as well? Is that a possibility?
Jen Lau, can we disaggregate the data that way?
I'm taking copious notes about the questions and the areas of interest that the board is expressing tonight.
Sure. I know that might be tricky because, like I said, it's not like a school in and of itself. Like they're pushing into the classrooms, but if possible, it'd be nice to see how our upper grades are doing as our remote learners are doing in the secondary schools as well.
Right. The only difficulty is that students are moving back and forth.
Yep. Yep. Quite a bit. Yep.
Who do you call a remote student? You know, I'll figure out a way.
Yeah. If possible, that would be helpful. And one other thing, just in terms of the teacher that spoke earlier and expressed her questions at the it's late. I'm losing the words. Open comment, public comment, whatever it is. You know, it does seem from what you're presenting that there are a lot of purposes, you know, for these assessments, that they serve multiple purposes. I would just ask that we be really clear with the teachers now, that they know this is, you know, the ones that are in the classroom with our students now, saying this is what this purpose is for you right now, that they understand that we're communicating that clearly to our educators. I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was a question, Megan, but I can tell you that all of the principals are working diligently with their staffs to make sure that the linked understanding is growing, building by building. The one thing that is, and I hate to beat the dead horse, but the one thing that does hamper any professional learning progress is the limited amount of time that teachers actually have this year to do the professional learning. And I think Carol Sutton spoke earlier about the teachers' desire to have more early release days so that they could have professional learning time brought back in. So, it's a balancing act this year for sure, but principals are actively working on making sure that their staffs understand the importance of Linkit, how to utilize it, and then ultimately how to talk to parents about it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Downey.
Well, Mark just gave the perfect segue into my question about how to talk to parents about it. And I know I'm really happy to see that you all have become much more comfortable with it. You're finding all the great features of it. I think it's going to be a great tool. And I know it's not necessarily right now, but do we have a timetable for how we're going to start sharing this information with parents, how parents are going to be able to use it? Will it be part of report cards? I don't know. What is the thinking on using this in terms of parent communication and involvement with their students?
I think the first step, Christina, is identifying what's a reasonable release date when we feel, when the superintendent feels confident that the schools are in a position to be able to have those conversations across the board uniformly. Once we do that, and I imagine we could do that in the early spring. Once we do that, then I think it'll be important to get the feedback from the parents after they actually get it in their hands as to whether or not this is something that's useful for them. If it's something that they're going to crave more information on and we have to tweak the parent report, or is it that they realize that for us, and we've emphasized this over and over again, that this really is an instructional tool. So the results aren't going to look a lot like traditional standardized assessment results. So I guess the long and short of it is we're focusing on a spring release, and hopefully spring is around the corner.
Hopefully. Thank you.
All right, not seeing any other questions. Thank you all for this. It sounds like this is a promising tool that's already paying off, and hopefully will continue to pay dividends into the future. With that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the update on special education, specifically preschool and the Community Connections Program. So
Okay,
I'll turn it over to you, Mary.
Right, I'll kick it off. This is Mary. We're here tonight to present to you the two programs that, as Carol said, bookend our special education services. Amy DiNicola Hickman is here to speak to you about the preschool program, and Diane Chiapetta-Fox will talk to you about our Community Connections Program. The plan right now is we're hoping to come in at around 15 minutes in presentation. I would ask if you could keep your questions till the end, and we'll take questions on both programs when Amy and Diane are finished. So Amy will start with our 3 to 5-year-old preschool program, and then Diane will come in with the 18 to 22-year-old Community Connection Program. Amy?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Amy DiNicola Hickman. I am the preschool special education administrator. I wanted to give you a brief background first, and the preschool program is required through IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, for special education eligible students. Parents, pediatricians, community preschools, and or the Connecticut Birth to 3 program may initiate a preschool referral to the special education process. Referrals to this process are made throughout the school year, which is very similar to any other grade level. However, students with disabilities may enter the program upon their 3rd birthday. IDEA requires students with disabilities to receive support and services alongside their typically developing peers. The Greenwich Public Schools preschool program achieves this requirement through a lottery process for typically developing preschool age students. and these students pay tuition for the preschool program. So you'll see on this first slide, it is our preschool enrollment in classroom seats. We do have a small number of students who only attend for speech sessions and do not take up a preschool seat, as we would call it, which is in our 5-hour program. In this graph, the blue is the peer mentors or the lottery students, and the red is the students with IEPs or students with special needs. And you will see from 2015 to present, there is a great increase, and we continue to grow in the number of students with IEP here in our district. The number of peer mentors I just wanted to mention on this slide is for this particular year is slightly impacted by the COVID restrictions that we're having. We do have one classroom that is on remote, so it really would be 9 more students there in the blue, but we do have a classroom on remote. If you can go to the next slide. The next slide really explains what we call rolling enrollment for preschool. What we've done is giving you the data of where we begin in the beginning of the school year and where we end up as far as enrollment. Because students with special needs are mandated to begin receiving their students on the date of their 3rd birthday, the enrollment numbers change dramatically throughout the school year. So using an October enrollment report alone, it really is not enough to help us determine the projected enrollment. I believe this year, the October says 63 students. We were right about there. We were correct, but that changes very, very quickly. We also use the historical trend of the number of children throughout the school year that we enroll. So if we take a look at using the average amount of students that we enter is approximately 28.5. So you can't have a half a child, so we'll say 29 students. This school year, or let's start with 2019 actually, I'm sorry. They started with 53 children in seats. By January 1st, we had 62 children in seats. And by the end of the school year, we had 85 students in seats. So the difference is 32 students that we added from September to June with students with special needs into the classroom. This year, we began with 59. By January 1st, we were at 67, and we are projecting 93 based on the number of referrals we have by the end of the school year. You can go to the next slide. So how does the preschool program recommend the number of classrooms necessary for budget? We use the charts that I've just shown you to project the number of students from September to June for the students who have to be added by their 3rd birthday. We currently have the number of students with special needs in each classroom is 6. The number of lottery students is 9. So if I know that we had 59 known students for 2020, 2021 in the beginning of the school year, and I add the 28.5 or 29 students, I would have projected out to approximately 87.5 or 88 students. So we're very close to where we projected as far as where we would end this school year. You can go to the next slide. Okay. We provide a very high quality program that meets the individual developmental needs of all our students as demonstrated by the achievement of their benchmarks. The Early Childhood Outcomes Annual Performance Report is for our students with special needs. We also have the Connecticut Documentation and Observations for Teaching System and the Connecticut Early Learning Development Standards that we use for all students. This chart represents Greenwich Public Schools achievement against the state targets. And I'm happy to say that again, We have far exceeded the state target in 8 out of 8 indicators. I do want to explain what the indicators mean as you're looking at this slide. Increased regular education placements. A regular education placement is the least restrictive environment or the general education classroom. In order for a classroom to remain a general education classroom, you must have at least 50% of the students who are typical peers. When you look at decreased segregated placements, a segregated placement would be a full classroom of students with special needs. We are measuring both social emotional skills and use of knowledge and skills, as well as meeting the appropriate behaviors that you would for a typical developing child. So on here, for the scores that we achieved below 80%, the 70s, those are the places where we are continuing to work on our goals for our strategic improvement plan. However, they far exceed the state goal and target. You can go to the next slide. We have many achievements due to the tremendous staff that I have, and I want to make sure that I say that because certainly they are working tirelessly to ensure that our youngest learners are achieving all of their benchmarks. They're amazing. But we have met all strategic improvement plan goals across the last 5 years. These plans included goals in literacy and social emotional learning. They also built an entire gross motor program for every preschool class, which is morning movers first thing when they arrive to school. We're very, very proud to say that the parent surveys for preschool remote learning were very favorable, especially about the staff who were working with the families. The professional development that we had planned for last year, despite the remote situation, was implemented, and it supported teaching and learning for both certified and non-certified staff. We have a group of instructional assistants, and we ensure that they receive the same training that the teachers are receiving in order to implement the programs within the preschool. That's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to Diane.
Thanks, Amy. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm going to talk. My name is Diane Fox. I am the program administrator for Community Connections and for Winrose and for homebound and community-based instruction. Community Connections is a new assignment for me. I am enjoying working with those students and with the staff at Community Connections. And I did produce the board report for you. I just want to highlight a few things about what's going on this year for Community Connections. First and foremost, I wanted to talk a little bit about our new location. So I call it our new old location because we were at Millbank many, many years ago, and now we're back at the Millbank building, which, as you all know, is the small building that's located right in front of Julian Curtis School on Millbank, and it is a great facility for us. It's great. The location is wonderful in the sense that it is centrally located to all sorts of resources for the students to access, both with recreation and with job opportunities and things like that. So we are looking forward to getting back to a time where we're not in remote learning or we're in COVID times, so we could take advantage of all those great opportunities. I also want to review with you some of the highlights from the report, including the change in special ed law, our COVID response at the school, recreation connections with outside agencies, and then talk a little bit about the students in our program. So if we can go to the next slide. Thanks. In the summer, this past summer, there was a law passed from the federal court, Connecticut federal court, changing special education law in Connecticut. So now students who were eligible for participation in Community Connections, students who are 18 to 21-year-olds, this lawsuit has now enabled them to be able to access IEP services and related services until their 22nd birthday. Typically what students would do is the school year that they turned 21 would be the last year that they would be in the Community Connections program. Based on this lawsuit, the students are now eligible until their 22nd birthday. So the district's response in compliance with the CDC directive, we contacted and advised the former students and their parents of the students' continued eligibility. 7 students were impacted by this decision. Currently, 1 student has returned to Community Connections and 1 is soon scheduled to return. Next slide. Thanks. So there's been, a few changes due to the COVID response over at Millbank. And obviously one of the big things that we're doing now is virtual lessons. Just so you know, the students at Community Connections attend 4 days in person and 1 full day remote, which is Wednesday. So the facility can be cleaned. Currently, we have 6 families and students who have decided that they are more inclined to be on full remote this year, which provides its own set of challenges. However, the faculty and staff of the Community Connections program and the people providing related services are really working beautifully to provide those kind of services and a program for students. So we have virtual classes that we're offering, including fitness, social emotional learning. We have Level Up, which is an outside group that comes in to present classes, and Ableist is presenting a healthy relationships class. We have our related services, speech, OT, and social work, who are presenting both in person to some students and virtually in individual and small group settings, which has been working great. What has been new this year that the teachers have implemented is daily social groups between the in-person and the remote learners. It's their way of trying to make the remote learners still feel connected and still have an opportunity to socialize with their peers who are coming to school on a day-to-day basis. In addition, the teachers are providing students, every student that comes to Community Connections, with a daily personalized schedule. And in those schedules are links for the students to access all of their activities of the day, whether it's the social group or an independent living or an ADL lesson, or a related service. So the teachers have been really working on individualizing exactly what students are working on to coincide with their goals and objectives and exactly what it is that they need. In addition, we have our transition coordinator who gives weekly group lessons to the students to talk about transition related issues that they may be facing. The next piece I want to talk a little bit about is, as you know, our 18 to 21-year-old program, we're working on transitioning them to what's going to happen out after they finish school. So working in vocation or jobs is a big, important piece of what we do at Community Connections. But as you can imagine, we've had to really pivot on what we're doing because we've lost many job sites due to the COVID pandemic. Some students have lost positions due to reduced hours, or just for safety factors. We've had to really kind of change and pivot. So what we did as a team, and with the support of all of our colleagues in the district, we've come up with some great activities for our students where they are kind of in conjunction with what everybody's doing, is lending a helping hand to help everybody achieve with our COVID situation and with remote learning. Our students also did that and in turn got to work on some jobs that were appropriate for them and super important for us. For example, they worked for the Board of Education, packing up the art supply packages for all of the elementary school students. As you know, the students can't share art materials anymore. So we had reached out to that department and they said, yes, we definitely have a need. We need to pack up all these packages for the elementary students, and our students gladly went over to the Board of Ed over a period of time as those materials came in and packaged them for distribution, which is great. They also did the same for music equipment. They created schedule boards for pre-K, desktop organizers for remote students, and they're even participating in some training on how to use the town's ADP payroll system. So that's been a real great partnership with the Board of Ed. Some of our students work at the high school in the media center, reshelving books. We have a volunteer paraprofessional and some are working in the main office. In addition, we've had to pivot from our competitive employment to more volunteering opportunities. And as you may be aware, that we have a great relationship with Filling in the Blanks in Norwalk, and our students from Community Connections have gone up there to assemble weekend food bags for the students from all of Fairfield County. And then, as you know, a number of our students are recipients of those food bags. So it's another way to pay it forward. We also have established a new relationship with a food pantry in Portchester, and they're also doing some assembly work at their facility at Millbank, assembling packages for them. In the future, we're looking to bring in some more task boxes for students to use to still continue their vocational training. Next slide. Thanks. Again, another big piece of Community Connections is recreation, but as you can imagine, due to our COVID pandemic, we're really having a hard time with really fully implementing a robust recreational program. But the teachers have really been thinking out of the box and done some creative planning for the students, and students and parents both are very pleased with some of the recreational opportunities. So as I mentioned before, we have the social group, the remote social group between the in-person and remote students daily. And we brought back swimming, which we hadn't done in many, many years with Community Connections students because of the job sites, but we brought it back as a recreational activity. At this point, it's on hold, but we did have a lovely time this fall taking advantage of the Greenwich High School pool, which was wonderful. Teachers have developed Millbank movie days, and Friday field trips have been changed to be a little bit safer, for the students, but we still have them. We're doing more outdoor activities when the weather is cooperating with us, like field trips and sports. And then we also bring in some virtual workouts like Zumba and some exercise activities for the students. And that's been received very well by both students and families. We also collaborate with a number of outside agencies. So most of these will sound familiar to you. They were familiar to me when I started working with Community Connections, but we've also added in a few others, again, just to sort of pivot and think out of the box to bring some new opportunities for the students of Community Connections. So we've always worked with Bureau of Rehabilitation Services and Department of Developmental Services, DDS and BRS, as partners, planning partners for our students, and a way to help transition them for what to expect after they leave Greenwich Public Schools. And that's continuing to go on, which has been great. Ableist is still a partner of ours, and Goodwill Industries has a job shadowing program that we do use. The Kennedy Center provides us with travel training. However, obviously we're in COVID time, so we're not really able to access our transit or our transportation as we have in the past, but that is something that's been available to us. We have Project Search at the Greenwich Hospital internship that's presented to us by Ableist. And then we have some students who are, becoming recipients of services from Greenwich Department of Human Services. So they've been a great partner. We also have students taking classes at Right Tech, which is another partner of ours at the Career Academy, and even a few students who are doing the Norwalk Community College High School Partnership Program. We have a future plan of bringing in for some first aid and CPR training, and there's a few other trainings that we have in mind to bring for the students, which has been great. Next slide. Lastly, this is just kind of to give you an idea of how many students we have. As I mentioned, we have 6 on remote right now. We have 22 students total. And as you can see, we have the age ranges and the breakout of how many students per age. As you can see, we have nine 20-year-olds at this point. And, with the new law, we'll see if that becomes an impact on the program in the future. But in the meantime, the students are wonderful. The teachers are tireless, and the paras that help us out have been great. And we really can't thank you guys enough, the Board of Ed and everybody else who's been supportive of this program to help keep us going. And I really have enjoyed the opportunity, and I'm learning every day with the teachers. It's just been great. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you both. Super informative. First, was really thrilled to see the picture of Darla Daniels in the pre-K pages. Both my kids had Miss Daniels. It's a phenomenal program. Truly prepares the students in it for what's coming next. And Community Connections, this may be the most in-depth I've ever heard it talked about, which is really nice to hear all the things that you're doing with the students. So thank you for that. Ms. Hirsch, I see your hand.
I wanted to echo Mr. Bernstein and say this is fantastic. I think in all the times I have sat on the other side of the table at Board of Ed meeting, I don't think I've ever heard community connections actually fully be discussed as a program. So that's fantastic. I also appreciated the update on our preschool program. So thank you so much for the in-depth report. I did have a quick question on the preschool program. On average, do you know how many students in Greenwich qualify or are referred to our preschool program via birth to 3 per year? And out of those number of students, how many are actually attending our preschools?
Let me just look very quickly because there is a chart in the board report on page 6, top of the page. It says resident preschool students evaluated for special education. So it gives you the number of what we call initial evaluations. That would be for preschool, initial evaluation, the number found eligible for their IEP, the number from a birth to 3 agency, and then the number from community schools or parent referrals. So last year we had 57 evaluations, 96% were found eligible, 63% were from birth to 3 agency, 37% were from community schools and parent referrals. It was a bit lower last year from community schools. I would definitely say because the schools were closed in the spring for preschool, it's typically a bit higher and closer to that 50% or that 40-60%.
But so out of those, for instance, 57 that you just pointed out, how many of them actually take advantage and attend our preschool program?
I would say 90%.
I was curious. And I just was curious because you also noted the transition process from, to kindergarten was revised in 1920.